staff and our executive director for all of the great work that you've performed over the last couple of years, most especially in the last several months. We've had a number of submissions, a great deal of work by our staff, working with the local superintendent, our local coordinators, to pull all the information together in order for us to be able to make some informed decisions. So, Madam Executive Director, thank you, and thank the staff again. I know that it has been a trying last several months to get all the information for us and to make sure that we are communicating effectively with all of the people who are involved in this process. But thank you very much. I'm going to ask now for the adoption of our last meeting summary. There are any revisions to that and or the agenda. Let me know at this point in time. I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to review the summary. And if you have any changes there too, this is the time for us to address those changes.
So moved.
Hands of any changes. So we have a motion to adopt the last meeting summary.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and properly second that we adopt the meeting summary. Are there any questions? If not, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Hearing none, the meeting summary is so adopted. We will now move to the public comments at this point in time. And we have several, we have 4 people by my list, and I hope that I've got them all right, Madam Executive Director. Kazeen Funk, Sharon Pugh, Kristen Handy, and Peyton Aldridge. Were there any additional ones added or deleted from this list?
No, that is everyone. And if we can let Kenzie let all of them in, it looks like they're here.
Okay.
So first is Kenzie Funk from the Strong Schools Maryland.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair Leggett, Vice Chair Kerwin, and members of the Accountability and Implementation Board. My name is Kenzie Funk, and I'm the Policy Advocate with Strong Schools Maryland. I'm here today to offer a reminder to you as members of the AIB of your critical role and responsibilities to the Blueprint. Over the past 3 months, through our tour for Maryland's future, Strong Schools Maryland has engaged with communities across 13 counties, tabling and collaborating on over 17 events. These gatherings made one thing clear. Communities are eager to learn more about the Blueprint and want to be actively involved in the process. However, it is also clear that there is nowhere near enough engagement and education happening across the state. The law is explicit in the AIB's duty to provide outreach and educational materials to the public on the Blueprint. While we have seen and do recognize recent strides in communication efforts, such as the hiring of the Outreach and Communications Director and the explanation of implementation changes, we urge the board to consider the quality, the depth, and the impact of the outreach, and what is being done to improve processes and outcomes in terms of engagement. The Blueprint success depends not only on accessible resources, but also active engagement from the community. So we urge the board to prioritize both community outreach and engagement to ensure that these gaps are closed. Also, according to the law, not only is the AIB responsible for providing outreach to communities about the Blueprint, it is also responsible for holding the administration and legislature accountable to ensure full funding of the Blueprint by recommending legislative changes. With only 8 out of 24 county plans having met the criteria for success as per the last AIB meeting, the quality of these implementation plans and shifting deadlines is concerning. We call the AIB to ensure that the Blueprint funds are not being reallocated to other priorities that are not within the law, and that we have sufficient funding to fully fund the Blueprint. As such, we urge the board to take a stronger stance to ensure that these adjustments do not dilute the promise of the Blueprint, and also advocate for things such as Fair Share Maryland to promote revenue generation to help fund our world-class school system. The AIB has the potential to be the Blueprint's strongest advocate, but that requires leading the conversation and holding firm on the necessity of full funding and robust implementation. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build our education system into the one that students deserve. Strong Schools Maryland and our network stand ready to collaborate in order to engage communities, gather feedback, and advocate for full and adequate funding of the Blueprint. Thank you so much for your time and your consideration today.
Thank you, Ms. Funk. Sharon Pugh.
Good afternoon, Chair Leggett, Vice Chair Kerwin, and members of the AIB. My name is Dr. Shannon Pugh, and as the Blueprint Implementation Coordinator for Anne Arundel County Public Schools, I'm here to voice concerns regarding comments made during the August 1st AIB meeting about career ladders. While we appreciate Mr. Leggett and Ms. Heiss acknowledging the challenges of misaligned negotiation cycles and statutory deadlines, we disagree with suggestions that LEAs who were not able to submit finalized career ladders by July 1st, including AACPS, did not take these deadlines seriously or begin negotiations on time. The career ladder involved a complete transformation of Maryland's longstanding teacher pay structure. Comments during the meeting downplayed the significance of this unprecedented undertaking. In the fall of 2022, AACPS proactively engaged consultants to analyze pay structures and propose career ladder options. Focus groups with unions and stakeholders ensured meaningful collaboration to begin this work. A union subcommittee was formed in the winter of 2023, 5 months before the first MSDE AIB Career Ladder Technical Assistant session, and the subcommittee met 14 times throughout the school year. AACPS and our bargaining unit agreed on a career ladder by spring 2024, overcoming challenges, including delayed and minimal written guidance from MSDE and AIB. Finalized written guidance on the many questions that LEAs presented to MSDE and AIB on the career ladder was issued in March of 2024 and updated in June, just weeks before the deadline. Our superintendent, Dr. Bedell, was proud to host both Mr. Leggett and Ms. Heiss this past spring, where we shared the work on our career ladder and asked for guidance on what to do if the finalized career ladder was not ratified by the due date. Unfortunately, during the 2025 fiscal year contract negotiations, the AACPS parties were unable to reach an agreement on unrelated issues. As a result, the career ladder cannot be finalized as part of a full package and submitted until other items in dispute are resolved. In our Blueprint Implementation Plan submission, AACPS described how we initiated other Blueprint career ladder components, including the role of Blueprint lead teachers. Last year, we piloted these positions at 3 schools and currently have lead teachers in 12 of our schools. This accomplishment would not have been possible if work on the career ladder had not begun in a timely manner. We urge the AIB to carefully consider statements made publicly on complex bargaining issues to avoid inaccurate and disparaging assertions about LEA efforts to implement Blueprint. We take pride in the progress made towards an initial agreement that aligns with Blueprint goals and strengthens AACPS as a premier school district. AACPS continues to support Blueprint as we believe that it allows us to leverage Blueprint goals for district innovation that result in academic success where all students in AACPS can belong, grow, and succeed. We look forward to submitting the AACPS career ladder once the impasse proceedings are concluded. Thank you for allowing me time to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Pugh. In fact, I think my comments along the lines that I believe that Anne Arundel has been quite transparent, hardworking, and really engaged very early. And I witnessed that in my efforts to meet with you, and in fact met with you and the superintendent for along with Ms. Heiss. So I'm quite aware of your efforts, and I think that where we stand today is maybe outside of your immediate control. And the work that you've done along the career ladder, I think, is to be recognized very clearly. So I'm aware of that, and I hope that anything that is said that's inconsistent with that we look very carefully into. So thank you for that reminder. But I'm very much aware of what you've done and what you're attempting to do along the career ladder. And hopefully we have no comments that will be inconsistent with your local efforts. And I thanks again for inviting us out to come to meet with you and to get a better understanding of what you do. Thank you. Okay, Christine Handy.
You're on mute.
Wow, sorry about that. My name is Dr. Christine Handy, and I am the president of the Montgomery County Association of Administrators and Principals. I've also had the privilege of serving as the president of the National Association of Secondary School Principals, advocating for leaders across our nation, as well as holding leadership positions at the state level. Over my 20-year career as a high school principal, 18 years in Maryland, I have experienced firsthand the challenges and rewards of leading our schools. I commend the ambitious goals set forth in Pillar 2 of the blueprint, particularly the commitment to elevate school leaders through a comprehensive leadership development system. However, I come before you today with significant concerns about the proposed requirement that all licensed principals be nationally board certified teachers by July 1, 2029. While I fully support NBC as a tool to recognize and enhance the skills of accomplished teachers, I urge the AIB to carefully consider its application as a mandatory requirement for school principals. To obtain NBC, one must be a teacher in the classroom and demonstrate academic growth with their students over time. When would principals have the time to lead a school and go back to teach a class for the period of time deemed necessary to gain NBC? How was it determined that this assessment would measure one's ability to be an effective instructional leader? The NBC process is undeniably valuable. However, it is designed primarily to elevate classroom instruction, not to prepare individuals for the complex and multifaceted roles of school leadership. The pathway to becoming an effective principal involves a unique combination of educational background, leadership development, and on-the-ground experience. The skills and knowledge required to effectively lead a school go well beyond the scope of national board certification for teachers. The proposed requirement could inadvertently narrow the pool of eligible and qualified candidates for school leadership positions, potentially excluding individuals who possess the leadership qualities and vision needed to drive high-performing schools, but who may not hold the NBC credential. Furthermore, the waiver process, while a necessary safety valve, could lead to inconsistencies and unintended barriers. Are we requiring all teachers be NBC by 2029? Principals working in the field currently have already met the requirements that the state of Maryland deemed necessary to lead schools in Maryland. In the union world, we call this regressive bargaining. The goal of Pillar 2 as it relates to school leaders is to have a comprehensive leadership development system. NBC is not the route. I strongly urge the AIB to reconsider the implementation of this requirement and to explore alternative pathways that recognize the broad spectrum of experiences and qualifications that contribute to effective school leadership. There are leaders across the state of Maryland that would love to have a voice in this matter. As the initial commission that developed the blueprint lacked the principal voice, we invite you to allow us to have a seat at the table to discuss further what a comprehensive leadership development system that leads to a highly effective leadership team in all schools would look like. And we would volunteer to host this if you like. Thank you for your consideration that the principal voice is just as important as the teacher voice. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Peyton Aldridge.
Good afternoon, members of the AIB. My name is Peyton Aldridge. I am an attorney with the Education and Children's Mental Health team at Disability Rights Maryland. Disability Rights Maryland is Maryland's protection and advocacy agency, so we are federally mandated to advance the civil rights of people with disabilities in the state. I'm here today to share public comments regarding the CTE pathways process and to recommend that AIB consider micro-credentialing opportunities for students. Members of the board, you discussed at the last meeting concerns with the impact that changing interests of high school students would have on both their interest in and the value produced by completing their chosen career pathway. Specifically, the choice of changing paths and receiving instruction, but not a credential, in a preferred career path or completing a credential in their original career path with no intention of using it. This choice is not unlike the situation facing many students with disabilities who, for various reasons, may be unable to complete the coursework associated with a credential and could participate in coursework but graduate no more employable than they started. Disability Rights Maryland's written comments that we will provide cover the value of micro-credentialing to Maryland's student population as a whole, including students with disabilities. But today I want to specifically highlight the positive impact micro-credentialing would have on Maryland students with disabilities. Micro-credentialing could allow students with disabilities to master parts of a job that they may not be able to do the entire job or may not be able to pass a required licensing test. Students could still earn a micro-credential that would highlight the skills that they have mastered and increase their ability to be employed in a role that would allow them to use the skills that they have mastered. Cosmetology, for example, has a very difficult licensing exam. But if micro-credentialing were available, an interested student may be able to get micro-credentialed in parts of that job. For example, demonstrating an understanding of salon services, scheduling, products, ordering, and then be hired to work in a salon. Micro-credentialing would enable us to expand access, create new entryways for non-traditional learners, and increase opportunities and outcomes for historically underserved and marginalized communities. The Blueprint's current goal is for 45% of high school students to earn either an apprenticeship or credential by the year 2031. By incorporating micro-credentialing, we can increase the likelihood of achieving this goal, and more importantly, increase students' ability to find employment after graduation. Thank you.
I think that's all the parties for the public comment section. Have I missed anyone, Madam Executive Director?
No, that's correct.
Okay, then, thank you, and thank everyone for your comments. We will certainly take them into consideration. I think we're now ready for our agenda item 3, and I'll turn it over to our Executive Director to start the state implementation plan submission process. Ms. Executive Director.
Yes, thank you. Emma, if you could, oh, sorry, the timer. Emma, if you could share the slide deck now, that would be great. So the first item is the state agency blueprint implementation plans. And those were due to be submitted August 15th. And we have received the submissions from the 4 agencies required to submit. And that is the, there we go, State Department of Education, the Higher Education Commission, the Career and Technical Education Committee, and the Consortium for Coordinated Community Supports. The Juvenile Services Education Program Plan is due October 1st. So that is not due yet and has not been received yet. We are in the early stages of reviewing the plans and will be, as we are wrapping up the review of the LEA plans and the various components of the LEA plans, we will be focusing on review of the state implementation plans and providing feedback, requesting revisions as appropriate, and then bringing those back to you all this fall. I see Vice Chair Kerwin has
Yes.
a hand up.
One of the things that I feel hasn't been addressed yet, and I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of it being addressed, is the call from the commission as well as in the blueprint for a quote upgrade of teacher preparation programs. And my assumption is that that would be done through some sort of partnership between MHEC and MSDE. They are the ones that I think ultimately approve these programs. So one of the things that I want to emphasize or ask you to look at specifically is, do these plans include any standards or guidance or expectations for the upgrade of the teacher preparation programs?
In fact, the blueprint law requires MSDE and MHEC, the Higher Education Commission, to submit a joint plan on teacher preparation programs and implementation of the blueprint requirements, and that was submitted as part of the MSDE and the MHEC plan. So we will be
Very good.
looking
Very
at
good.
that.
And please highlight that when you come back with your recommendations.
Absolutely. This might be a good moment to also share that previously the board had established a teacher preparation work group to bring the various teacher preparation programs together with other higher ed and LEA partners to discuss some of the implementation requirements of the blueprint and some of the challenges. This was sort of back in the early days of the board, back in 2022 and early 2023. We are in discussions about reconvening that work group to focus on, again, talking about some of the challenges of implementation and, if there are changes that may want to be discussed or proposed or technical assistance that can be provided. So we're looking to reconvene that work group this fall. And in fact, I think there's in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, a report is expected, I believe it's December 1st, that would help to inform any proposed changes to the blueprint. So that will also be another forum to have these conversations and bring the implementation partners together.
Excellent. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? This was really just to let you know that the plans are all in. They are posted on the website, and so the public and everyone has access to those plans as submitted.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands, so would you like to move
Yes,
on to
please.
the next
State agency,
agenda item?
update.
Yes. So as part of the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, you may recall that the AIB requested that MSDE establish a special education work group to discuss and work through the various issues related to special education and how the blueprint can be sort of utilized to make improvements for special education students and also for really all students, so that we can help support, really focus on students who have the needs. That work group has been meeting since I think middle of 2023, and their final report is due December 1st under the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan. You have the state superintendent has submitted a request for an extension to that date in order to take a little more time to develop and refine their recommendations. However, the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan was adopted August 1st, and it's, it does have that December 1st date. So we have a motion for you all to consider that just really provides an interpretation of what is required by December 1st under the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan, to be, focused on any recommendations that they have to make by that date, and particularly any recommendations that might be appropriate for consideration during the upcoming legislative session. There's nothing in the comprehensive plan that says that the special education work group cannot meet after December 1st or provide additional reports. So that is really what this motion is conveying, is that we received this request for an extension. You know, we do ask that they submit whatever recommendations they have by December 1st, and then the work group can continue working and provide additional reports. They're also proposing that the work group continue on and receive quarterly updates on progress of implementing the recommendations. So that would be the motion under item 4.
Okay, this may be an opportunity at time for at least a little bit of discussion so that the public is a little bit better aware, informed, I would say, about some of the dates that we have and the fact that we made some adjustments for dates or submissions. I hope that you can take a little bit of time to maybe respond to some of the questions where we've made changes on the dates based on I think the very good insight from Strong School Maryland on the earlier testimony about why we were not adhering to the precise dates that we had initially, that we made some adjustments. Would you like to comment on that as relates to what we're doing here so that we'd have a better understanding of why that was done?
Well, sure. In this case, we're really responding directly to a request for an extension to a date that was provided in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan. The board is required to adopt updates to the comprehensive plan by August 1st each year. And so that occurred at the board's August meeting. And the date that is contained in the update is the December 1st deadline. So this would this motion will allow MSDE and the members of the special education work group both to meet that deadline, and then also to continue meeting and providing additional recommendations if they choose. The comprehensive plan update did also include adjustments to the dates that the LEA plans were being submitted. And this, I think this is what Strong Schools Maryland was referring to. The decision that was made earlier this year to bifurcate the process for the LEA implementation plans for the 2024 plan, so that there was an initial submission date of March 15th for what we called the Part 1 plans, which included the, and we're going to get into this more in the next agenda item, but the Part 1 plans that were very focused on sort of strategic, the overall strategic plan, strategic goals for implementing the blueprint, so that the LEAs had enough time to focus on providing that response and working with their strategic facilitators. And then there was a second date established of May 1st to submit the other 23 questions that the LEAs were asked to respond to in their 2024 plans. And that was done just to ensure that they had sufficient time to work with their strategic facilitators to provide responses.
Yeah.
Does that address what you're?
Yeah, and I add that whenever we've had an opportunity to address the questions of dates and times, we've considered the impact on the overall plan, our overall time frame for ensuring compliance with the plan itself, but also in consideration of the school year, other requirements that we are asking the local agency in the state to make, so that we get plans that are more comprehensive in their response, and that we work through these challenges. But we're not doing that willy-nilly. We're doing so and a great deal of collaboration and understanding of trying to ensure that we get the best compliance that we can in a timely fashion, but not to do so in a way that would undermine the credibility of what we're trying to do. So that's the basis for that. But in any time that we made those adjustments, in addition to what Ms. Heiss has said, all of those things have gone into consideration. And hopefully we've gotten it right and you're doing it for the first time. You can expect that there may be adjustments here and there because all of this was not coordinated in a precise manner that we've been in operation for years, so that we are clear about all the times, the sequences of things that naturally follow.
Yeah,
Then-
as I said, we are going to get into that a little more
Right.
because there are a lot of components to the plans this year. There are a lot of moving parts that
Right.
we're following in order to really ensure that we're holding everyone accountable for the requirements of the blueprint.
Right. Thank
Would
you.
Like me to read the motion for
Yes.
item 4? Okay, so the motion is to approve the following policy interpretation of the 24 Blueprint Comprehensive Plan update. The Special Education Work Group will submit a final report by December 1st, 2024, which will contain any recommendations proposed by that date. The work group may continue working through May 30th, 2025, and may turn in any additional work products or reports. At that time, that is the motion.
Okay, I'm going to make that motion. Is there a second to the motion? As
I'll
read?
second.
Okay, moved and properly second that we adopt this motion on the overall update of the 2024 comprehensive plan. There are discussion of the motion before us. All right, sorry, Joe.
Yeah, if the recommendations come in on December 1st, that's going to give us enough time to turn things around and forward recommendations to the legislature, or is that the timeline for that, is that too compressed? Would we need a couple weeks prior to that?
So I mean, the date is in the update, so we can't change the date right now, but we can I have talked with MSDE about this interpretation, and really that whatever they submit in December, by December 1st, would include any of the high priorities that might require legislation during the session. We can certainly ask them to share in advance before they submit the report. And we also do attend the special education work group meeting. So we are hearing the conversations, and we would be aware of whatever they are proposing to submit in a report by December 1. So we would definitely have a heads up about that.
Okay.
It's a good point.
Good. Thanks for your question, Member Manko. Are there any additional questions of the motion before us? If not, we will now entertain a vote. All in favor of the amendment, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay. Any opposition? Abstention? Hearing none, the motion is adopted.
Great, thank you. I would like to we do have the presenters for from the Maryland Initiative for Literacy and Equity.
They're here?
Yes, they are. Before we go to them, if we could just move to the next agenda item very briefly, just to provide
Okay.
the context around Miles' presentation and the LEA literacy plans. So we would just, Emma, if you could put the slide deck up very briefly. And go to the literacy plans. There we go. So, thank you. As part of the 2024 LEA Blueprint implementation plans, each LEA was required to submit their comprehensive pre-K through 12 literacy plan. And the drafts were submitted in January, and then the final literacy plans were submitted by June 28th of this year. And as part of the review of the 2024 plans, the approval of the literacy plans and the feedback to the LEAs is part of that approval process. We will come back to all the other things that are part of the approval process after we have this presentation from our esteemed guests. But for the moment, just wanted to share that Mile, on behalf of the AIB and MSDE, has been reviewing those literacy plans as well as overseeing and coordinating school visits to elementary schools around the state as part of the expert review team process to examine what sort of instructional practices and coaching practices are occurring in our schools. And so they are going to present on that in a moment here. The state superintendent of schools has submitted a recommendation to the AIB that all 24 comprehensive literacy plans from the LEAs are ready for approval. And Mile is going to be talking about their findings as part of this whole process, as well as some of the feedback that has been provided to LEAs. I want to note that Mile has prepared interim reports on the pre-K to 5 plans, and then separately the grade 6 to 12 plans. Those plans are still, those reports are still in draft form and are being finalized to incorporate LEA feedback. And so those reports are not ready for public release at this time, but they will be released as soon as they have been finalized. And with that, if we could move to the next agenda item.
Rachel?
Yes.
Yeah, before you do, when are the final plans from Mile expected?
That, I think, would be an excellent question for Dr. Bolger and Dr. Gibson.
Okay.
And they're coming up next.
All right. Thank you.
How are you, Dr. Kerwin? We're going to chat about it just a bit, but our plan is to have those ready by the end of the month.
End of this month. Thank you.
That's our plan.
Okay.
Thanks.
So on that note, should we take it away from here?
Yes.
Yeah, are you good, Mr. Chair? Did you want to say anything?
And please introduce the other presenters as well.
Sure. So we have from the Mile, or the Maryland Initiative for Literacy and Equity, the two key partners from the University of Maryland is Dr. DJ Bolger, and from Morgan State University is Dr. Simone Gibson. And with that, now please take it away, and you should have screen sharing ability to share your slides.
Y'all bear with me just a moment. Okay, can everyone see?
That's perfect.
Yes.
All right. For starters, thank you so much for allowing us to come and present to you today. Thank you so much for that introduction. Again, my name is Simone Gibson. I represent the illustrious Morgan State University and one half of Mile. And I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime, DJ, to introduce himself, Dr. Bolger.
DJ Bolger, I'm the director of Mile, and Mile was started at as a joint institute between the University of Maryland and Morgan State through a Grand Challenges venture at the University of Maryland. And yeah, we are happy to be here to talk about all the great work that we're doing.
So,
is anyone else, DJ, you're a little hard to hear. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do to address that, but.
Yep. Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
So we are planning to speak with you for about 20 minutes, reviewing just give me some context and background, some of which Ms. Hayes just reviewed with you, but I'll go through it pretty quickly. After the context, we'll talk about some major findings, and then we will conclude with recommendations and then open up to any questions. But as we're going along, if you have questions, also feel free to just chime in. So you all know the timeline probably better than we do, but this work really started for us in November with the joint resolution that was passed, commissioning the work of reviews of literacy plans in the state of Maryland. It took a couple of months between getting contracts and scopes of work and hiring folks to do the work and training. And so between roughly January and March, we got ready to engage in the work. And that also included the creation of the tool that we use to go in and understand what was going on in schools. And we'll share that in just a moment. From about April to June, we went to schools. We visited a whole host of schools. We tried to ensure that the representation was exceptionally diverse, from the highest performing schools to some of the lowest performing schools. We talked to teachers, we talked to administrators and stakeholders at the school who were engaging in literacy work. And we also reviewed the literacy plans. And I just want to note, I know there was a question from Dr. Kerwin about the secondary plans. The focus was on the K-5 plans. And I just also want to note that in January, school systems were charged with submitting K-5 plans. They did not have to submit secondary plans until May. And even then, only 12 or so of the 24 LEAs submitted secondary plans. So there may be a question in terms of, well, what's going on with secondary plans right now? They just came in a little later. So we didn't have the opportunity to get started reviewing those until a little later. But as was mentioned, our goal is to have those finished by the end of the month. And by finish, those findings will be combined with the same document where the K-5 reports are as well. So it'll just be one document instead of two separates.
Are all of the secondary plans in? You said,
Yes.
yeah, they're all in by now.
They're all in now. Yes,
Yeah,
and we've seen them all for that matter. DJ, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, they were submitted on the 28th. So the full and many of the what we could talk about, there was we allowed districts to we gave them initial feedback as was stated here. We gave them initial feedback on the K through 5 plans in March, and then they were allowed to submit for revision and get further feedback from us in May before submitting their final on June 28th. So after June 28th, we went through and re-reviewed all of those comprehensive literacy plans. So in many of those districts, that means we've reviewed them at least 2 or 3 times, and that's not it for the K through 5. And we've had our separate team that we brought in our secondary experts to review the secondary pieces of the plan, and now we're merging the two.
Mm-hmm. And we've also had at least 2 meetings with the administration of each of the LEAs, reviewing again those interim findings as well as once they resubmit it. So at least 2, for some of them more. And as was mentioned, by the end of September or so, hopefully we'll have that secondary and this whole process will be wrapped up. I just briefly review kind of what our process was, but just again, we not only looked at the literacy plans, but we visited a bunch of schools. We talked to a lot of teachers and a lot of administrators and paraprofessionals and individuals who are responsible with delivering literacy instruction. The ways that we framed feedback involved us looking at 5 drivers. They were curriculum and instruction, professional learning, multi-tiered system of learning or MTSS, instructional leadership, and community cultural engagement. And so when you all, I'm sure you've already looked at the reports, but when you'll see the feedback again is centering around these major drivers. And as I also mentioned previously, between November, when we first got the great news about the joint resolution for this work, and when we actually began the work, one of the things that we created was, along with the support of AIM, we created a rubric and a tool that helped us to conceptualize, well, what's going on in classrooms? How do we make sense of all this information? And we just wanted to show you this framework for continuous literacy improvement that was presented by Dr. Wright in January of 2024. This becomes important because we just wanted to set the context around the framework that we created that is very much so in alignment with that framework. It's also important to note that the literacy plans were not evaluated based on what's good or bad or right or wrong, but where are you within the spectrum of actually implementing and rolling out evidence-based literacy practices? So you were between exploration, pre-implementation, implementation, and sustainment. And it's also important to note a lot of the school systems were really hungry and eager for guidance. And so the original plans that we received in January weren't necessarily true reflections of what some of the school systems were doing because they didn't necessarily know what needed to go in their plan. But with the frameworks that we provided them in the rubric, we found a huge improvement between when they first submitted in January and that last iteration of their submission. Again, not because the school systems weren't necessarily doing the work, but they just didn't have a consistent way or didn't know exactly what information to provide in their literacy plans. I talked about the methodology, but I'll just show this really quickly. I just referenced that we visited lots of schools and talked to lots of teachers, and you see the numbers here that correspond with that. Something I also did not mention was that we also gave a survey, roughly 1,600 teachers. They gave feedback on that survey, and that's from we have representation from each of the 24 school systems in Maryland. So that's a really great significance, some really great data from that. And DJ, I'm gonna turn it over to you now, my friend.
All right, you're gonna have to hit the button when I tell you. So. So the first thing we'll highlight is the fact that we looked at what are some of the things that are, especially from our review, but also based on what we also know from our rubrics, is some of the things that we saw in the most effective implementation that's happening. And there are districts in our state that are really firing on all cylinders. We'll talk about that a little bit. That they are really in a mode where they are working hard. And I will say, as we will present in a moment, all 24 of our LEAs of our districts the leadership is working hard. I mean, these individuals are working tirelessly. I feel that they're not sleeping at all, but they are really working hard on this initiative. So some of the issues that we've seen or the effective implementation, one is high quality instructional materials, one that has foundational skills, those basic skills of reading and writing, comprehension and knowledge building, which many of you have heard about, but these are factors that we look for, and this is what we're seeing in effective implementation. And then writing and expression, explicit teaching of writing and expression, higher order thinking. Those are critical to effective implementation of literacy instruction. Second is aligned trainings for teachers, administrators, and support staff. So one of the things that I want to take a step back here, because I think some of the things that people might have heard about, there's a science of reading, or we're implementing the science of reading. Well, actually, there's two pieces. What people typically refer to as the science of reading is really what we think of as the science of learning, or how children learn, and that's gained from both work that goes on in laboratories and in neuroscience labs like my own, as well as what goes on in classrooms, but that's really about how children learn and what are the best types of ways that we reach different types of children. But then there's the practice, there's the science of teaching reading. And then when we talk about training, there's two pieces. So lots of the work that's been done has been to give teachers both that science. You think about a doctor has to study biology and cellular biology and those types of theoretical things of how the body works. But then they also have the practice side of how do I actually, perform my practice. Well, that's true of teachers too. And so what we've seen is both of these are involved in this high level of training. So this professional development is not only offered to teachers, but is offered to leadership and to support staff. There's strong cultures of responsive literacy leadership. That means both the school leadership and the central office leadership are both directing, but also being responsive to feedback. There's consistent communication with families and teachers. And as I said before, that other individuals are involved in the process. Interventionists, instructional coaches, specialists like special ed teachers and ESOL teachers are also involved in the process. These are what we've seen in our most effective implementation, and ample time allocated for literacy instruction and intervention. Next slide, please. So barriers, what have we seen in terms of barriers? Lack of sustained and consistent training for professionals, right? When there's a mismatch between who's being trained or not everyone is being trained. Inadequate or inconsistent training on tiered interventions. So we'll talk about that MTSS process, that the fact that if students are not learning just from the core instruction for all students, that we need to intervene on those kids that are falling behind, not making grade level standards. And if they fail to respond to those tier 2 level interventions, then we need to give more intensive intervention, tier 3, and that typically starts the process of identifying that child for an individualized education program. Inadequate capacity for data analysis, so understanding how the assessment data that we're collecting should drive key decisions, like what types of interventions should be used. And lack of training or quality materials, especially for our multilingual learners, right, where you need those scaffolds put into place. There's also misperceptions or simplification about what we call structured literacy or these foundational skills. You hear in the science of reading, oh, it's all about phonics. Well, no, that's a misperception or simplification, right? That what we're talking about in this process, and I don't like using the science of reading term. I usually like to talk about evidence-based practices, but that we're using evidence-based practices that includes comprehension, includes expression, includes different types of skills. So there's also difficulty aligning culturally responsive teaching practices with our evidence-based literacy strategies. Shortened or not enough time to teach these skills, and poor communication with families or lack of effective communication. Next slide. So to summarize our key findings, all LEAs are providing training on the science of reading or the science of learning and evidence-based practices. All of our LEAs, thanks in large part to the Maryland Leads Initiative, those ESSER CARES Act funds that went to support this, all districts have begun implementing this. So in some form or another. There's inconsistent access to that training between grades 3 through 5 or from ESOL or other support staff. And a lot of that has to do with, in large part, the fact that a lot of the efforts from not just Maryland Leads, but all of the work that's been done with the Ready to Read Act and the Striving Readers grant before that were all directed at K through 3 and not necessarily directed at the intermediate grades 4 and 5, as well as secondary. So what we have seen in LEAs is that they have all adopted high quality instructional materials and foundational skills and knowledge building. We've seen some inconsistencies, particularly in writing and expression. Transition issues, as I said, for grades 3 through 5. So lots of the K-3 teachers are really firing on all cylinders. We've seen in our observations, seen great instruction, uniform. You go from one school to another school in the same district, and you see the instruction in K-3 is uniform, and kids are engaged. They're really like I said, firing on all cylinders. In grades 4 and 5, like I said, that haven't been the attention of a lot of these prior efforts. That instruction hasn't been quite as strong. The districts are implementing MTSS. However, there's a lot of challenges with MTSS, particularly in differentiating instruction when you're teaching to all students, as well as how to provide that tiered intervention support. A lot of this is due to personnel issues and sufficient training. There's also difficulty with supports and scaffolds for our growing multilingual learner population. So that is a key issue that we find again and again. There is strong leadership across the state, as I mentioned. All of our LEAs, like I said, they're working tirelessly to implement their literacy initiatives. But there are some variabilities in how far they are along with their communication and their sharing of data and goals. And all districts are engaged in family and community outreach. However, in many of our districts, it's very school-based, and so oftentimes it depends on community school or Title I school, and so they're Title I school funding, and so oftentimes there is just a little bit of a need for stronger support for those non-Title I schools. And in many cases, like I said, just better communication for families. Next slide. So for the broader issues, right, there's a focus on K-3 and prior initiatives that 4 through 12 have been less engaged in the quote-unquote science of reading or shift to evidence-based practices. The sunsetting of the CARES Act money, the Maryland Leads funding that sunsetted in August, is leaving a lot of districts kind of having to now fill that gap with, and that brought in personnel as well to do a lot of these coachings. And so there's especially in our smaller districts, they're really struggling with that money going away and how are they going to fill the gaps. Again, we talked a little bit about the misunderstandings of science of reading and culturally responsive practices. And a lot of that has to do with that limited resources in terms of what's out there for good models for the culturally responsive practices. New teachers are ill-prepared for teaching literacy, whether they're from our traditional teacher prep programs or from alternative certification pathways. So there's siloed administrative structures. So this is a big issue when our ELA offices are really driving, our English language arts offices are driving the literacy initiative, but the other offices, such as the ESOL offices that are working with our multilingual learners and the support staff around them, or the special ed offices, or even the offices that the principals respond to, are working on their own initiatives, and so they're not all working in lockstep. And so that horizontal alignment from the top down, that's been an issue that we've seen again and again in many of our districts. And there's differences between LEAs due to size, demographics, and cultures. And so again, some of it's siloing, some of it's just the broad stroke of how many students and the diversity of those students. So again, these are some of the kind of broad level issues that we've seen. So as Dr. Gibson said, we evaluated the plans on how far, right, we did get feedback on.
Could I
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
second, go back to the broader issues. Let me just sort of break this down a little bit differently here. Could you fully explain to me that the first bullet here, focus on K through 12 prior initiatives, mean that 4 through 12 have been less engaged and shift to evidence-based practices? What do you mean by that? That they're not following science of reading, they're not prepared, or I'm not sure I fully understand that.
So
The focus was on, instead of starting with some of the older students, the focus was really prioritizing the students who are newer to learning and learning to read. So the focus was on kindergarten through third grade. And so it's not that for some of the school systems, nothing was happening above third grade, but the priority was focused on kindergarten through third grade teachers. So here's what this looks like. A lot of school systems paid consultants and organizations to host what's called letters training, which gives background about what is, I know we don't like the term science of reading, but what is it? And what does it look like in the classroom? Not how do you do it, but what it is. And so a lot of school systems had limited funding, and the training itself is pretty expensive. So the funding went to prioritize training for teachers in kindergarten, first and second and third grade. And if there was additional, other folks could get it, but the priority was K through 3. So the question is 4 through 5 in older grades, are they doing the work? In some cases, yes. But what you'll find in those school systems is that the teachers K through 3 are further along in terms of not only understanding what is science of reading, but how to apply it, how to make it make sense within their classroom, and using the materials, the high quality instructional materials that are reflecting science of reading. Does that make sense?
Answer. All right, let me drop down to bullet 1, 2, 3, 4. New teachers ill prepared for teaching literacy, whether from traditional TPS or alternative certification pathways. We have any idea of the magnitude of that? What are we talking about here?
It's difficult to quantify it, and a lot of this comes from our conversations with principals and with school leadership, with district leadership, about the fact that when their new teachers come in, they're not prepared. So they are having to spend lots of their own funding for this specialized training because they aren't being prepared. They aren't given this, science of learning, science of reading theoretical background knowledge, as well as, strong models of practice in evidence-based practices in these different certification pathways. And so that is a critical issue that the districts are reporting to us in our focus groups and our interviews, that that is one of the causes of they're always having to retrain or train for the first time these new teachers on what are the best evidence-based practices and what is the science of reading, if you will. But yeah, this is something that districts are saying is this is a barrier to their implementation.
But there's opportunity in that. And Dr. Kerwin, I see you. There's opportunity, right? So I know it can be kind of scary, like, oh my gosh, we're producing all these teachers and they're not prepared. Okay. But the flip of it is it's some of the newer teachers who are more open to learning about this approach and to taking on new curriculum and being more inventive with it. Some of the more senior teachers have been teaching the way they've been teaching forever. They're comfortable with how they've been doing things. And there's a little bit of pushback sometimes. So while I could see how this could be a little disconcerting, there's also opportunity in this that some of the school systems also reference.
I do have a question about this. I mean, this is to me, surprising and concerning because, we're talking about evidence-based strategies for learning, for teaching and literacy. And you would think our teacher preparation programs would be committed to evidence-based practices. They are, after all, academics that do research and presumably are keeping up with the, what is the best thinking about instruction in literacy. So is it the curriculum in the teacher prep programs is outdated? Is it the professors aren't committed to this? I mean, how could this be?
I could give you, and I see Dr. Lynch has a question as well. I'll probably preface what what Jennifer is probably going to say is one is we're an import state, so we do import a lot of teachers, and we do have a growing number from these alternative pathways. So they may not have those
Right.
teachers may not have.
That's understandable.
Yeah, I will say, and you know, like I said, as a reading scientist in a college of education, that it is something that has been a culture difference in terms of colleges of education have often had pedagogical studies that are philosophically rooted, and oftentimes that the science of learning, science of reading goes on in different spheres of academia, I'll say. And it's been as somebody who's been through this for 25 years or so, it's one of those issues about how do those two merge and play in the same sandbox. And I think that's one of the factors that colleges of education are, I think, grappling with, and you know, that they need to include more of that science of learning components and certain aspects of evidence-based practices. I think this is, like I said, this is a ongoing conversation as well within higher education.
Are there other questions?
Jennifer.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you know, just for everybody's awareness, DJ and I have had a lot of conversations sort of offline about a lot of different things related to literacy. So he's familiar with some of my questions. First, I just really do want to say thank you. I appreciate the way that you are framing this in terms of the science of learning. As a former school psychologist, I really do think that we have to be integrating the science of learning and brain-based behavior, you know, more into every conversation that we're having about little people learning. So I do really appreciate that. I am, you know, sort of wondering if we have the data that we need to really think critically about where are those breakdowns in terms of teacher preparation. Like, do we know, are our districts able to say, you know, imported students who have been in a teacher prep program from another state perform, you know, at this level as compared to Maryland teacher prep programs, as compared to our conditional teachers, as compared to our teachers who are teaching, have a bachelor's, but are teaching in content versus out of content. You know, I don't know if your research has become that specific that we can actually look at learning outcomes based on teacher prep programs.
So this is there's an ongoing conversation nationally I've been a part of, and those are difficult data to assess. And even so, in the policy sphere, trying to track where both the knowledge coming out, right? So there's this, you know, several states have implemented a teaching of foundational skills test, if you will, a foundational skills, you know, test of reading for all teachers prior to certification. Other districts or states have given teachers other examinations or surveys that have been developed by colleagues of mine from Texas and from Tennessee that, you know, really try to assess, you know, teacher knowledge of knowledge and practice. So but there's no real strong data out there. It's hard even across the nation to really get this data, for multiple reasons. But I do think that it is. I mean, I think it's possible to try to do a deep dive into either, you know, if not saying who's doing a good job and who's, you know, which institutions. Other states have done audits of higher ed in order to assess what is going on in higher ed and how are they teaching their teachers or teaching their pre-service teachers. So there's a lot of different approaches to this, but there's not a lot of, I want to say, strong data, even nationwide, to really identify, you know, teachers coming out of different programs or out of alternative certification programs and their knowledge of literacy practices.
Can you talk for just a second about what is the existing program approval, and, you know, like, do teacher preparation programs get to develop and design their own reading programs? Is there a structure by which, you know, those who are teaching reading have to have approval and by MHEC, by MSDE? Is there minimums? I think to your, and when was that last done? So, you know, like, how recently were our teacher preparation programs, their reading, I think to Dr. Kerwin's question, like, when is the last time that their reading programs were assessed and approved by whoever assesses and approves them?
So, go ahead.
So there are a couple ways that schools are held accountable for the ways in which they are training candidates. You have departmental accreditation, and typically through accreditation of like your program, an education program, the program themselves get to select which approach or approaches they take as it relates to how they train their students. So you have national accreditation, and then you also have Maryland state accreditation, and you have accreditation standards aligned with secondary, and then some aligned with elementary. The secondary standards, I was on that group. DJ, do you remember when that was? Maybe 2017 or so for secondary, when it was rewritten?
Yeah, it was rewritten, and it's been approved, and it's been in effect. Yeah, so our programs have been evaluated.
Mm-hmm. And then for elementary, now they're standards, right? But they haven't been updated recently and haven't been approved.
Yeah, so the story with the secondary, with the elementary standards is in 2004, 2005, Dr. Grasmick, then superintendent, that started the 4-course literacy sequence for elementary, and had a rubric that was routinely approved by MHEC. In around 2017, there was a panel convened to create new standards for elementary. Those standards were submitted in 2019. So in 2019, there was a suspension of the MHEC review by the superintendent, and then the standards that were written by this new committee were submitted for COMAR, but in January of 2020. So we all know what happened after that. So what's happened is, with the suspension of enforcing the old MHEC standards in the preparation for adopting the new standards in January of 2020 or February 2020, we faced a pandemic, and they've been sitting in a file drawer. And the suspension of the 4-course sequence has been it continues on. So we have not had, as far as I am aware, we have not had program review of that 4-course literacy sequence for elementary or early childhood programs since 2019.
So it's the choice of the school, of the preparation program, to embrace a particular reading approach. That's their choice, and there's no mandate.
Just to follow up on that, and if I'm using the wrong terminology, apologies, because this is not my area of expertise, but I think there was a sort of outdated approach called whole language for teaching literacy. So if one of our institutions wanted to prepare its teachers using whole language as the strategy, they would be permitted. I mean, they could do that?
Yes, provided they're addressing whatever the national standards are for reading, which were fairly broad. Yes, they could do that.
And good.
I was going to say, now that's is that a could the state step in? I don't know whether we're talking about state standards or national accrediting standards, but could the state step in and put some kind of requirement on what is acceptable for preparing teachers, elementary school teachers, to teach literacy?
Yeah, and as I said, from 2004 to to 2019, that was the case, that we did have a 4-course sequence that the syllabi and an approval process with the annotated syllabi was in effect, that you had to meet certain
Got you.
criteria.
Okay, that was outside of national accreditation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Gotcha.
here's where things get a little hairy, Dr. Kerwin. There's lots of research out there, and folks will say, well, even though we are not embracing evidence-based literacy practices as you defined them, we've got lots of research to justify the work that we're doing. And this is where higher ed and engaging faculty in higher ed about the ways they're teaching teacher candidates to teach reading gets really sticky. Because what folks will argue is, I've got lots of research. I've conducted my own research about what's impactful. And even though it's outside of what, we're talking about here in this call, they'll suggest that they've got their own research, and there's lots of research that exists that's different than this, but it's still science-based. That is a prevailing popular argument.
Yeah, but still, the state could impose the standard. That's what I understand. Okay.
It's been done before.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And Dr. Kerwin, if I can add to that,
Sure,
I think
please.
I believe that MSDE, does sort of look at that 4-course sequence. And so I think to your point earlier that you made about the accreditation, I think there's a real opportunity for MSDE, for MHEC, for MILE, for the AIB to look and say, and make sure that our national accreditors and our accreditation standards are aligned with what MSDE has put out as their literacy policy, or will be, sort of as they're thinking about their literacy policy, which will also be in alignment with the way the AIB is going in and evaluating schools and looking at literacy in schools. Like, all of these components really should be speaking to each other, because it isn't helpful if a teacher preparation program has to teach their children, teach their teachers, their students one way in order to have them pass the praxis test for reading, or in order to get national accreditation, or in order to get nationally board certified. These things sometimes are in conflict with each other. And so the more that we can work, and perhaps even as the AIB, lend our voice to helping to bring alignment to all of these components, I think will help our districts and our teachers, whether or not they've been Maryland trained or not, have some common understanding of what we're talking about. And I do just want to take a moment to kind of highlight that in this data from MILE, what we see is that focus on K through 3 seems to be strong, and 4 through 12 is not. And my concern continues to be that the science of reading is being interpreted as phonics instruction.
Right.
And so that is really reductive to what the science of learning and the science of reading is. But I think it is why I have concerns about how we continue to talk about this, because it's more than phonics-based instruction. And what I really appreciated in what the MILE team has presented today is the importance of background knowledge, the importance of addressing the needs of multilingual learners, writing, comprehension, vocabulary, this sort of broader sense of what literacy looks like in all grades, pre-K through even, through 12. But I have concerns that we're not going to see any changes in MCAP scores or anything else if we continue to say science of reading is letters, because it's not.
I know we need to move on, but I just want to make one final comment. My understanding is that MSDE, the state board, has mandated that science of reading, or evidence-based, let's use that term, practices are the standard for the state.
That's correct.
They've done. Now, how can it be that our state institutions are not preparing teachers for what the state has mandated the practice will be in the classrooms? That makes absolutely no sense.
And so I guess one of the, again, and I could give you, I'll try to make a 1-minute statement here about the term that ever since the National Reading Panel, the term balanced literacy, was the kind of buzzword of, we're going to balance phonics the phonics phonemic awareness with comprehension and meaning making, right? There was this kind of dichotomy of, oh, the science of reading is all this, it's all just phonics, and that's, which, as Jennifer said, is not true. It's not, that's not the case. The notion of what we talk about in terms of best practices in what in this structured, what we call structured literacy approaches, is that you're practicing particular skills as you move towards becoming literate, and that includes phonics, it includes other types of skills. And this issue of balanced literacy is, well, we should be doing everything all at once. And again, I don't want to go too long in terms of giving full examples, but in essence, a lot of it comes down to, well, how do you balance how much you focus on phonics and how much you focus on comprehension and meaning making. And what the evidence suggests is that there's a very need to have things in a very particular, explicit, structured way, especially early on, and then releasing students to become more independent in that. I think that's what a lot of the, I want to say, modern focus, the current focus is. So yeah, without getting into a huge debate about what is the science of reading and the science of learning, I would just say there are still some work to be done about, what do we mean by balanced in terms of balanced literacy.
Okay. Any other questions on this slide?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Please
DJ,
proceed.
we were here on this slide.
So just to quickly go through is that, as we said, we evaluated districts on their framework in terms of how far along they are in this movement towards these evidence-based practices. We also gave feedback in terms of where they can improve on those practices, where they need to shore up those practices. And so here we see that the proportion of districts that are in either pre-implementation, where they're just adopting, starting to pilot, new materials or pilot these approaches, versus early implementation, where they've gone beyond piloting, they're rolling it out in all of their schools, but they're just starting that approach. Implementation is where they've done a full year of implementation, and so they seem to have this starting to get down, but they might need to still refine or get better at it. And then sustainment is where things are rocking and rolling, and they just need tweaks around the edges, and they're making small improvements on the edges, and they need to find ways to sustain the efforts that they have. So this kind of breaks down the proportion of our districts, or should I say the number of our districts that are in each of these stages. What you don't see is anybody who's still in that exploration phase, or that the zero, which is they're not, right? So so when we put that framework on a 0 to 4 scale, all of our districts are in that pathway of implementation. Some are still getting off the ground. Most of them are off the ground and now trying to really get it running right.
So now we'll just chat about some recommendations. And again, please feel free to hop in. And again, the recommendations are based around the 5 drivers that we use to organize our feedback. And the first is curriculum and instruction. There are 3 major recommendations that we're making based on this. And one, it's important that teachers not only understand the why of how children learn to read. We talked about the science of reading or the science of learning, but they also need a depth of knowledge about the curriculum that they are presenting to students. And what we found in some school systems is, due to financial constraints, it's either or. Some are doing both, but it's important for teachers to know not only the why, but the how. Not either or, not select between the two. So there's suggestions here in terms of providing additional support for schools to understand how to balance both, especially in light of funding constraints. There's also a recommendation around the use of data. What we found is there's some inconsistencies in terms of how school systems not only understand data, break it down. Some school systems, for instance, had not up until submissions of reports, broken down data by subgroups. So there wasn't a clear understanding of who's doing a great job of reading, who's having additional struggles. So, and also how to use data to take a highly structured lesson plan and differentiate it based on the kids and the needs of the kids that are in your classes. So there are recommendations around the importance of expanding training for teachers, specifically around differentiated instruction. And a part of this also involves clarifying understandings. We talked about misunderstandings about what is science of reading or science of learning, but there's also a lot of misunderstandings about cultural responsiveness, what it is, what it looks like, and what it can and should be. So just recommendations involve providing some trainings, offering not only clarifications, but models of what this can and should look like. And last but not least, we found that overall, while some school systems did a really good job of paying attention to writing and reading, a number of school systems, quite a number, really focused on reading and the process of learning to write. And I don't mean just physically like write the letter A. I mean like creating sentences and transitions. The art of writing is an area in need of some support. So we have recommendations around providing some support for that for school systems.
For professional development, again, having that statewide approach to science of reading training, and I know that the MSDE has just unveiled, some approaches on the science of reading that trainings that will be available to districts. Hands-on modeling, again, this is something that we've talked to districts across the state about. How do we get more of that hands-on modeling? So when we gave our survey to teachers, right, with 1,600 responses, over 1,600 responses, and we asked teachers, what type of professional learning experiences do you need? And teachers, by and large, said, we want hands-on, we need, modeling, we need that co-teaching, we need co-planning, we also need time for planning. And so that the type of training that they need now goes beyond just the workshop approach, where you just go to a workshop and you see and you hear about things, but you actually have some clear modeling, especially for those that are in the district with you. That happens with coaches, literacy coaches that are in the buildings right now, but with ESSER, a lot of those were paid for by ESSER funds. One of the other pieces of that is that those one other alternative to that is using videos of other teachers, master teachers that are in the district or even in the buildings, that if you have some really key demonstrations of how you taught this and you can get a video of that, that's a good way of within districts and within schools to provide that support. Ensure training occurs during contractual hours. So a lot of the difficulties that come around professional learning stem from contractual issues that, it's difficult for when teachers can be brought in. So how do we make sure that this is occurring on time, that we respect teachers' time, respect them as professionals, or pay them for their time for professional learning? Focusing on those intermediate literacy skills, as I said, those PD opportunities from in 4th and 5th grade on writing, comprehension, vocabulary development that are especially, so having that be explicit. So I think a lot of the writing instruction that we see is very implicit. Oh, just write something, there's not explicit structure to it. There's not a strong modeling for students. So we need to provide better PD support, especially for our intermediate and I would say even secondary teachers on this. Emphasize advanced literacy skills and differentiation strategies. So the model in which teachers would differentiate in the past would be you'd group your kids by high and low readers in a very broad brush. And so oftentimes kids would be put into groups and in a way that you're not working on the skill that those particular kids need. You're actually you're working on you're treating all of those kids within that low skill group, quote unquote, as the same, as a homogenous group. Whereas one kid might have a decoding issue and one kid might have a vocabulary issue or a comprehension issue. And so we really need advanced training on how to differentiate. And then, as I said, that job embedded coaching is, again, critical.
And if I can also add to that, the coaching is also important because it's non-punitive, right? Teachers need time to make sense of the professional training that they have, the professional development that they've had, to make sense of what's going on in the curriculum, to make mistakes, without it being something that impacts their evaluation. So that non-punitive piece becomes really important, especially as it relates to coaching. The multi-tiered system of support. So we talked about this really briefly in the beginning, but essentially, this is where teachers take students, they teach whole group, and then they start working in smaller groups to shore up skills with kids. And then if the small groups are not as impactful, they work with individual. And it's often not the teacher, but like a literacy coach who will work with students on a one-on-one basis. So teachers not only understanding that framework, but how is it that they use data to go about creating tier 2 groups, small groups? What do they do within these groups? How do they ensure the groups are not stagnant and they're flexible and they're really addressing skills as opposed to kids being locked into groups all year and kind of doing the same thing as DJ was referencing that everybody else is doing, even if they don't need it. Them understanding that structure is of great importance. And what we found is a lot of the school systems are in need of some greater support in terms of helping teachers to understand how to structure MTSS and how to make it meaningful.
Instructional leadership. Obviously, as I said, districts are doing a great job in terms of they're putting in a lot of effort. Places where we see some need for some more enhanced literacy leadership or instructional leadership is obviously providing that targeted PD for not just for the teachers, but also for the administrators. Because what we see oftentimes is that if the principals don't know the practice, and for those of you who may not be aware, it's been common practice for principals to give teachers negative evaluations if they are doing whole class or whole group instruction, if they're focusing on skills, as opposed to having students guide or lead the learning in some ways. And so, which is an kind of like I said, an old, I want to say an old approach, but it comes from a particular philosophy. There's a need for better instruction for those principals on understanding what that process is, as well as other leaders. There's a need for obviously culturally responsive practices. What do those look like? It's not just telling teachers that not to be biased, but actually what are some practices in the classroom? Many districts are actually utilizing the curricula that have supports in terms of having content and materials that are about different cultures and different places, but it also means how do teachers engage meaningfully in embracing the children that are in their room, the different cultures. And that includes kids from Appalachia and kids from the Eastern Shore and very different cultures, not just how we tend to think about culturally responsive practices. There's a need for fostering, data-driven approaches, right? So that there's a sharing of data at from the district level to the school level, and those are being included in the school improvement plans. We do see that in many of our districts, so that's a good thing, but I think we just have to systematize that across our districts as well. And then improving communication with families, which comes up in our next next slide.
So this is an area that even some of the most advanced school systems that are really thriving the most from a reading standpoint, this is an area that we found across the board is in need of a lot of love and support. Culture and engagement with the community is an area that's not evaluated. And so even though school systems recognize its significance and importance, it just was an area that school systems didn't consistently invest in the same ways. However, something that was really interesting that arose was that a lot of your Title I schools, even though they may be mandated to do so, they're engaging in this work. And, it's opportunities to learn from Title I schools in terms of how it is that they're going about engaging parents and getting buy-in for some of the literacy work that's going on. But anyway, promoting equity and community engagement. This is consistently across schools. What we'll find is it might be a school here or a school there that's engaging in some really meaningful ways, but it's not consistent. So a recommendation is to put some supports and some trainings in place to help ensure that school systems are conscientious of this and that the practices are really consistent across school systems. Building family and professional capacity for engagements. Many may assume that naturally you just know how to work with parents and caregivers, but that's a really inappropriate assumption. There is a need for some training and support for teachers to understand how to meaningfully engage families and how to tap into some of the literacy strengths that are taking place in every single home and create learning bridges of sorts between what's going on in home and what's going on in schools. But there's training needed for that. Understanding this ties into the enhancing cultural relevance. Again, every family is doing something of significance from a literacy standpoint at home. And it becomes a responsibility, but an opportunity for schools to understand what those are and create learning bridges or reading bridges of sorts between what's going on at home and schools. And there's training needed around this. And last but not least, just consistent and reliable communication with parents and families. We found that that was also an area in need of some great support.
And lastly, we'll just kind of summarize the findings from 6 through 12 for our secondary. So where implementation has been effective highly in, like I said, that K through 3 space or pre-K through 3 space, we are obviously seeing districts start to make this shift in secondary. So in most of those plans that we've seen, a lot of that work is just starting, right? So there are things that have been going on, but a lot of that work and that shift towards, evidence-aligned practices is just really starting to hit the ground. Majority of LEAs are working to align their high-quality instructional materials for grades 4 through 8 or 4 through 10. And why we say that is a lot of that the curriculum past 10th grade tends to be very highly specific. So a lot of these materials are really geared through 8th grade and sometimes 10th grade. The majority of LEAs are establishing these intervention practices, these MTS practices, but this does require a bit of a culture shift. And in secondary grades especially, oftentimes, especially even in the special ed case where access to the curriculum is prioritized as relative to intervention. So time for intervening and remediating literacy skills as opposed to finding ways to provide access to the curriculum. And so I think a strong approach to be able to do both provide access to the curriculum, which is required by law, but also to intervene on those reading skills. And especially, like I said, in 4th and 5th grade, we find a lot of those intermediate grade teachers are just not aware. They don't see themselves as reading teachers.
That's right.
They see themselves, and especially and once you get to secondary, they definitely don't see themselves as reading teachers. They see themselves as content error. I'm a math teacher. I'm a science teacher. I'm a social studies teacher. That's what I teach. I don't teach literacy. I don't teach reading. But in point of fact, they do, right? There's text, and they have to summarize and get the main ideas of those texts, the gist. There's lots of morphology of breaking apart words into the pieces that are meaningful. So there are ways and places, and all of the recommendations from the U.S. Department of Education, places like the regional education laboratories, really surround these pieces of how to integrate strong evidence-based practices into these content area courses. And so that work is just beginning, and a lot of it takes that culture shift in schools.
And that's the end of our presentation.
Okay, are there any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
I have, do we have time for a few more questions?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to just express both appreciation and admiration for the work that Mile has done. it is at a time when we have so much focus on literacy, to have such a high quality operation going out and assessing what we're doing is, I just can't tell you how beneficial this is to all of our goals with literacy, which really are at the heart of our goals for the blueprint. And what one you know more about what's going on in literacy in our LEAs now than anybody. You've been out there and talked, and so if you could say, you had a bucket of money or a magic wand, what is the single most important thing you would want us to do to really move the literacy ball forward? What is the thing that is most needed right now to really get us to where we want to move us to where we want to go? That's one question. And second, the other question is, do you think we have reason to expect in the next couple of years that we're going to see meaningful movement on the literacy scores based on what we're doing in Maryland right now?
Okay.
Do you want me to jump in first?
Yeah, by all means.
So on the first question, what do we need?
Yeah, I mean, if you were going to do one, here's what's missing that we need to be doing right now to get this ball really moving.
I would say some of the things that happen. I'll say even with the money used for Maryland Leads, I'll say some of these districts have really used it and really got themselves ramped up. Two things: training and the personnel.
Yeah.
These districts not just have good they've done lots and lots of training with all of their teachers. They've done modeling and in person, but they've had the personnel in the schools, literacy specialists, coaches that are both going into the rooms and helping and modeling for them, and giving them that non-evaluative feedback that Dr. Gibson talked about. But they're also many of them are also providing that intervention support. So they're doing intervention groups, and then they're thus modeling those intervention groups for those teachers. So it takes both lots of training, but it also takes that support personnel to really get this running right. And that takes high level leadership as well, because there's data that's coming from the top. And I'll say in these districts, those teachers know the name, and they've sung the praises of the name of the ELA coordinators. And I ask other teachers in other districts, when you think of your ELA coordinator, do you have a positive or negative? And they were singing the praises of, like I said, these districts that were doing well, they were singing the praises of their ELA coordinators. Mm-hmm. So I will say, that's why all of those buckets, but those things that I highlighted are two.
Do we have the person power to do the training that's needed in the state?
We can build it. We can certainly build it. But it can be done. Lots of states are doing it, have done it. We can certainly do it.
And many of our personnel are doing that training, are Marylanders who are doing that training and doing a lot of that work in other states, right? So we have the expertise in the state. So it's not that we don't have the expertise in the state.
Mm-hmm. And can we move the needle?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you want more depth than that, but yes, absolutely. You will see some change. Yeah. I have no doubt. These schools are rolling. These school systems are rolling. Even the ones that are just rolling it out like this year, for instance, right? They are fully and wholly committed. And I have no doubt that you're going to see some change.
We're seeing green shoots in some of these districts, and I'm hearing it from literacy leaders. I'm seeing it in our evaluations when we say, when we give our surveys, we say, what do you see different in your students? And they say they're more engaged, they're more independent, they're reading more independently. So this is that competence breeds confidence. So putting the motivation cart, the competence actually is breeding the confidence in their students. So when they focus on building the competencies, they're getting more confident and they're reading independently. And we are seeing lower identification for risk. We're seeing in these districts that are really there's reporting effectiveness in just the first year or so of rollout.
Thank you very much. I think
Thank
some
you.
other hands are up.
Thank you. A wonderful presentation.
There's some other hands.
There are a couple of other hands
Okay.
raised. I think Member Robinson was next.
Sure. As others have said, thank you a lot for what you've shared today. I have a question, but a couple of things I wanted to kind of elevate that came across in the presentation. I heard you say that literacy operates in a silo sometimes, and so when there's competing interests for professional development, it can be a challenge because the administration side might be focusing on one thing, but then the literacy content side is focusing on something else. And that resonated with me as a teacher. Is seeing competing interests in terms of how teachers are professionally developed. But even as you were going through the presentation, talking about families, talking about curriculum, there's a need for a lot of professional development. And I'm a secondary math teacher, so I am a literacy teacher, so I do understand that. But I was one of the people who, I started teaching in a K-8, so I have a lot of elementary friends, and I've seen them go through letters training and seen them get professional development, things like that, but there hasn't been as much on the secondary side. So I definitely understand that, and I recognize that there's an opportunity to grow secondary teachers too. But I guess my question is, given competing interests in professional development, and given that, you mentioned how we need like non-evaluative coaching and teachers need time to make mistakes and all that kind of thing. In your interaction with like the different LEAs and administrations, like, is there a sense of paring back on certain priorities to focus on this? Do people understand that you can't add another thing to teachers' plate without taking things off? Has there been conversation about how they would like to prioritize? What are some best practices maybe you've seen of people saying, oh, we're going to focus on this because it's really important, and maybe we're not going to worry about this other thing later? Like, you talk some about that balance of making sure that teachers have the space to really explore this area of professional development without being overwhelmed by the other things that have been on their plates.
So I don't think those two exist, right? Engaging in this work and all that's required and not being overwhelmed, right? Like that's just kind of the state in which we live in. But let me tell you how awesome some of the unions are here in the state of Maryland, because it's a lot of the unions that are telling school systems, you absolutely will not do this, this, and this. You absolutely will not, mandate that teachers do X, Y, and Z outside of hours. And so, listen, we can have a whole conversation about unions, but they are working really hard to ensure that teachers are protected, and that the whole kitchen plate, so to speak, is not just being thrown at them at the same time. So unions have stepped up in some really incredible ways to ensure that school systems are being very conscientious of teachers' time and teachers' time and ensuring that they're prioritizing what it is that they're presenting to teachers. But this has also been part of the tug of war that you're seeing within schools, right? Because most teachers, especially when we're talking 3 to 5, they can't just afford to focus on one thing, right? Especially if you're not in a school that's departmentalized. So that overwhelming piece, I don't have a solution for that, Justin or Mr. Robinson, to be very honest with you, but I can tell you what we've seen is that unions have been really proactive in helping to remind schools that they've got to collaborate and work together to ensure that training and what's being asked of teachers is reasonable and, taking place within the professional workday. Is that answering your question? I'm sorry. I think you asked for best practices, but.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think it's just maybe partially just to kind of uplift it into the conversation that it's not like a lot of this requires deep reflection and time to process. And I would hate for teachers not to have that opportunity to really take this to the full extent that it could be because of competing priorities. And so maybe you don't have the answer, but it needs to be part of the conversation.
And I will say that sometimes other priorities could be embedded into the same. So, sometimes I think this is what's needed for better training, meaning social, two other big priorities, social emotional learning and culturally responsive practices are things that, we highlighted how culturally responsive practices is or should be. And that's one thing that Mile is working on, is how to embed that better into these evidence-based practices, science of reading type of approaches. There's a science behind those culturally responsive practices, as well as a humanizing piece behind those practices, right? Is that you understand better and you can engage those comprehension processes when the content that you're engaging in is consistent with what you have experienced in life. I mean, that's a known fact in cognitive science for since 1972. This is a common, so there are pieces in which we can build better training into, so that some of those other pieces, and like I said, that social emotional learning piece also can be embedded in some way. So it's not even like it has to be divorced from, or that these can be multiple competing priorities.
But Mr. Robinson, we met so many teachers who are paying for letters, who are paying for Orton Gillingham, like outside of their work, and they are using their own money to purchase materials. Some of the materials are a little questionable. That's another conversation, but they're using their own time and their own finances and resources to try to understand how to enliven science of reading within the work that they're doing with their students, even when the school system that they work for may not have had the resources to do so. There are some incredible stories. Y'all got some really dedicated teachers here who go above and beyond to ensure that they're doing the best they can to try to figure out. We didn't meet one teacher, probably not to your surprise, who was excited to fail kids, right? Teachers just need information to try to figure out, what is it that I'm supposed to do next, right? But most recognize there's a need for something to be different. And a lot of them, even if they didn't receive that specific support from their school system for whatever reason, funding or whatever, a lot of them were doing work on their own. So there's a silver lining right there for you, Mr. Robinson, also.
Okay, thank you.
Member Lynch?
Thank you. I just want to thank you guys again for all of your hard work. I think you are an example of how we do have higher ed partners who are coming to the table to bear their research and their expertise in this field. And, as long as I think we continue to be in that space, to be listening to the expertise of the great experts we have in Maryland, I think, we are no doubt going to see the movement that we want to see. I want to especially thank you for your focus on writing. I think it's so important when we talk about literacy. I encourage that as districts are trying to figure out how to do this very complex and difficult work of addressing gaps in literacy, that we don't take time away from students in science and social studies. I think our MCAP science scores show how that bears out when we are not providing our students opportunities to really have that content knowledge, that background knowledge. So I hope that we continue to think more critically about how literacy is embedded into content and not separate from content, because ultimately we are reading for knowledge. And so they shouldn't be separate activities, and that we don't refine reading to be a skill-based activity, but that we are really expanding students' opportunity to sit with text, broad, rich, diverse text of all different kinds of genres and types, and doing that same level of reading, so that our students are spending time doing reading, not just doing the skills that lead to reading. And so that's just sort of my soapbox. But I did want to ask the question because you talked about money. And so I was wondering if maybe Rachel could just take 2 minutes to talk about how the blueprint actually has funding that will support this continued work after. I know that a lot of our districts have really capitalized on some of that short infusion of funds, but coming, I believe, unless I'm incorrect, is blueprint support that will allow this to continue.
Sure. I think what you're referring to is the funding to support additional collaborative time for all of our teachers, so that they are teaching on average, teachers teach about 80% of their day. And the Blueprint's goal is that teachers are teaching 60% of their day, which is in alignment with top performing systems around the world. And that additional time that they're not teaching, they are participating in professional learning communities, collaborating with peers, providing, receiving, and or providing the instructional coaching and the modeling and the interventions that Dr. Bolger and Dr. Gibson were describing. And so as the funding ramps up over 8 years to provide additional time for teachers, which translates to needing more teachers. And of course, we know that we're in a teacher shortage situation at the moment. So much more serious than it was at the time that the recommendations were being developed. So, you know, acknowledge that that's a challenge, but over time, the funding would provide enough funding to literally to add 25% more teachers to our schools. And so that's the Blueprint's vision for how this work happens. And it also is tied to the career ladder, and all teachers would have that 40% of time not teaching. And then as teachers move up to the career ladder, it drops to 50% and 40%, which I think, to Member Robinson's question, you know, we may need to take a look at those percentages in terms of whether it's enough time with all the competing priorities. But that's how the Blueprint envisions this work moving forward. And so I think we have a lot of like thinking and talking to do about kind of how we move from where we are with you know, a good number of separate literacy specialists and instructional coaches who are not, for the most part, teaching in the classroom, to sort of the Blueprint vision. And what that looks like over time, I think is something we need to dig in on for maybe the next meeting. Member Lynch, did that answer your question? Are there any other questions? Don't see any hands. Mr. Chair?
Any other questions there?
No,
Okay.
we've covered all the questions.
Guess we can go to our next item then.
Yes, we can do that. Thank you again, Dr. Bolger, Dr. Gibson, for your work around the state with our teachers.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Inspiring. Yeah, it's really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present. As I said, there's a lot of great and hard work from our teachers and our administrators out there, and I think there's a lot of kind of just, you know, everybody working in the same direction, everybody rowing in the same direction is what's going to make this work.
A good start. All right, thank you. Our next agenda item is continuing what we started prior to the MILE presentation with an update on where we are in reviewing the LEA implementation plans. I will just, we do have Dr. Sanders from MSDE joining us at 3:30 for the presentation on the latest assessment results, but we would like to just go ahead and sort of get started again on this, and then when if someone can let us know when our guest is here, we can shift to that agenda item. Okay, so Emma, thank you for sharing your screen. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so we just wanted to sort of give the high level overview of the various pieces of the 2024 implementation plans. There are many more components to the plans this year than there were last year. And so we understand that it's a lot of moving parts. And so we're going to walk through where we are in each of these. And then we also have a summary exhibit that shows for each LEA where the status of their plan for each of these components. So that is available to you all. It's available for the public, but we're going to get to that at the end of this item. So we have the main pieces of the implementation plan are the part 1 and part 2 responses. And those are what the part 1 responses were submitted in March, the part 2 in May, and MSD and AIB staff have been reviewing those, pretty much nonstop since the part 1 plans first came in, providing feedback to the LEAs, requesting revisions, and then bringing them forward to you all for approval as soon as possible. There's also the initial career ladder that was to be submitted July 1st, and the 10% salary increase that was required also to be submitted July 1st, including essentially the superintendent attesting to the fact that they did meet the requirement that the teacher salaries have increased by 10%. The pre-K-12 comprehensive literacy plans that were due at the end of June and that we just have discussed deeply. And then the final component are the MOUs for the career counseling programs. Those were first required last summer. And for those districts that need to revise or update their MOU, they will need to submit that and it will need to be approved. So we're just going to walk through the status of where we are for each of these. And Emma, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So since our last meeting, AIB and MSDE staff, just as a reminder, again, the part 1 and part 2 implementation plans this year followed a phased approach. So we are still in the process of finishing up reviews for part 2, but we have reviewed all plans, and since our last meeting, the August 1st meeting, AIB and MSDE staff reviewed updated responses from the 16 remaining LEAs. They were asked to submit updated responses on August 16th and August 23rd to determine if they met the criteria for success for part 2 of their implementation plans. AIB and MSD staff found that 21 of 24 part 1 and part 2 submissions now meet the criteria for success based off of this review. So that includes the original 7 LEAs that were shared on August 1st, as well as the other LEAs for this week as well. And we have 3 that have updated responses that still do not meet the criteria for success. But we have shared that with them, and we are going to be meeting with them moving forward to walk through the needed updates. In all 3 of those cases, those updates, it's only for a handful or even in some cases just 1 response, but we want to ensure that we're providing all the necessary support to help meet the criteria for success for those outstanding responses. So this time we do have the feedback form similar to what we had last time linked in the agenda. So you can take a look at each area of feedback and each LEA plan feedback individually if you would like to. But we have actually identified some really common areas of strength and opportunity, as well as common areas for growth and improvement for each LEA plan, or for the 16 that we're talking about today. There are some that also, or I'm sorry, the 13 that we were talking about today. There are some that do overlap with the LEAs that were shared last time as well. But one of the big things that we wanted to identify, or that we found as a common area of strength and opportunity across these 13 LEA plans, included increasing access to pre-K programming and strengthening partnerships with private providers. Now, you'll also see that this is an area for growth and improvement. We did see some really promising practices from some LEAs, but we also saw some opportunities for growth in others, and we wanted to elevate the importance of this, to help implement this mixed delivery system that the early childhood education programming is really
Hey, Emma.
founded on. Yes.
So we have definitely had a problem getting private providers to participate. You say there's some strength in making that happen. What's changed? Have we suddenly been able, at least in some instances, to increase participation of the private providers?
Well, I think that in terms of increasing participation, we wanted to, I wanted to distinguish between increasing participation and strengthening partnerships with private providers. And so we're really focusing on the strengthening partnerships component of this and practices that LEAs have implemented to help strengthen those partnerships. And we wanted to call out some of the best practices that we've seen, or promising practices, I guess you could say, that we saw in some implementation plans related to strengthening those partnerships. For example, providing professional development. I believe that this is in St. Mary's County, around grant writing that private providers can be involved in. There's intentional involvement of private providers and professional development opportunities with public providers that some LEAs are implementing. So it's less focused on increasing participation, but more, the leading indicators of progress towards that ultimate goal, which include really trying to strengthen those partnerships. That's really what we were focusing on in the feedback.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We also saw some, again, this increasing access to pre-K programming beyond looking at the strengthening of private partnerships. Well, this is part of this because, of course, strengthening partnerships with private providers will help to ultimately increase pre-K programming. But we also saw some great practices with regards to enrollment systems, with regards to, focusing on teacher pipelines for early childhood educators. So we're putting this into this broader category of strengths related to increasing pre-K access to pre-K programming overall. And you'll see that as a common area of strength across some of the LEA plans and the areas of feedback that were called out. Another area of strength and opportunity that we wanted to highlight is differentiating the practices to help differentiate instruction to support student achievement and help students meet ultimately the college and career readiness standard. We saw practices that included, looking at different supports for students who are not on track to meet the CCR standard, who have not met the CCR standard, differentiated instruction with regards to things like personalized learning experiences that are being piloted in Carroll County across 3 of their middle schools. We also, this is connected certainly to expanding supports for diverse learners, particularly for multilingual learners and students receiving special education services. We saw some strong practices that we would like to, look at, potentially sharing with other districts who are looking to maximize what they're doing to help differentiate instruction to help meet student needs. And there's a really strong focus in many of these plans on implementing strong systems of multi-tiered systems of support and ensuring students get the supports they need to achieve across all student groups. We also saw a use of a variety of communication strategies that districts were implementing to ensure that stakeholders are aware of Blueprint implementation. This could be internal and external stakeholders. These include different types of meetings and engagement opportunities that districts are implementing to ensure that word about the Blueprint's implementation is getting out to their community members, as well as educators and professionals working within school buildings and make sure that they're aware of what's happening with regards to blueprint implementation specifically. In terms of common areas for growth and improvement, we again, noted that there are some districts that could still be moving forward with regards to strengthening partnerships with private providers. And, we're eager to help disseminate potentially promising practices to those districts that we're seeing being implemented successfully, hopefully, and we'll look at that impact over time in other districts. We talked about this last time in detail as well, but we also, some areas for growth include obviously increasing educator diversity and ensuring that districts are implementing or developing robust plans to help ensure that their educator workforce represents the students that they serve. And we, talked a little bit about this earlier today too, in a couple of different capacities. I know that there was public comment on this, as well as an emphasis on the importance of instructional leadership that just came up in Miles' presentation. But this requirement of supporting school leaders as part of the Blueprint law to achieve national board certification by fiscal year 29. A lot of areas of feedback related back to ensuring that districts have a robust plan to help school leaders get to national board certification by this date. And, just as a reminder, this is part of the Blueprint's vision for ensuring that school leaders are instructional leaders within their school building as well, as we see in other top performing systems across the world. So, that is the intent of this, and we want to ensure that districts are thinking ahead of this to help school leaders get the supports they need to meet this requirement. And again, this is a kind of connection back to what we just heard, and we see this as well in the implementation plans and the feedback that we got from reviewers. There's a general need for looking at how districts are using data, how they can be using data more effectively to help inform necessary instructional changes, to tie them to instructional changes that they're implementing, as well as ensure that data is being used systematically with regards to progress monitoring and looking at what data is used, what information can be used to help change instruction to meet the needs of students and increase student achievement across all groups. Improving partnerships with institutions of higher education, that showed up in a couple of different capacities with these implementation plan reviews. We saw this with regards to supports for students who have not met the CCR standard. Ultimately, that collaboration with institutions of higher education can help to create supports that are based in experiential learning as the Blueprint envisioned. And we wanted to call out those opportunities for collaborating more with post-secondary institutions that districts are currently working with to create those supports. And ultimately, those will be part of a larger programming, comprehensive programming to help students reach the CCR standard. But there is an opportunity for focusing more on what those supports could be and what can be done in concert with institutions of higher education to develop and implement those supports effectively. We also saw some opportunities for collaborating with IHEs with regards to teacher preparation and building sufficient pipelines of high quality and diverse teachers to meet workforce needs in early childhood, in K-12, and those were called out explicitly in a few implementation plans as well. And then, the last piece of feedback that we're calling out here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this, but engaging a diverse array of stakeholders on the Blueprint's purpose and goals. And I really want to differentiate between the Blueprint's implementation versus communicating about the Blueprint's purpose and goals to a wide audience. This is, transformative work, and the Blueprint, we need folks to know not just what the Blueprint's purpose is, but also what its goals are to help maintain this investment and understand the urgency of this work. And while we saw districts really committing to communicating in a variety of ways what the Blueprint's implementation activities are, why this work is being done in terms of the implementation requirements, why changes are being made, and communicating that back to the Blueprint's requirements, there needs to be a greater focus on helping stakeholders across the community in schools understand what the blueprint is, what it's all about, why the blueprint is being implemented to ensure that this really necessary public investment continues in the blueprint. And we, wanted to see some more of that in some of the communication plans and call that out explicitly in some of the feedback. But, I'll just pause. Really, I'll say one more thing about all this, and then I'll pause for questions. This is not comprehensive feedback. It doesn't capture everything. And simply because an area of strength and opportunity was identified in an implementation plan, we know that this doesn't mean that implementation is perfect and that it will continue to be perfect. There's always opportunity for growth. And we're excited to continue to work with districts to do that work moving forward. And we also recognize that, not all of the areas for growth and improvement are identified here as well. But we wanted to share what we were seeing, most prominently in some of these implementation plans. There's other areas for growth and improvement, as well as areas for strength and opportunity that individual feedback forms identified. And we encourage you to take a look at those in detail. And we also, are excited to talk more about those areas of feedback with the districts individually and what the plans are for helping to address them or to maximize and continue implementing and the areas of strength and opportunity that were specifically called out. So, just wanted to note that this isn't meant to be a comprehensive summary of the feedback, but, some of the really key indicators of progress and some things that we were seeing across multiple plans. So I'll go ahead and pause and see if anybody has any questions.
Any questions? Okay, let's continue then.
Okay, thank you.
Great. If you can go to the next slide. Thank you. The last question in the part 2 of the implementation plans was related to strategic budgeting and resource allocation. AIB and MSDE staff have reviewed the question 23 responses. And at this time, 7 of the 24 LEAs meet the criteria for success, and we are recommending approval of that component, this question 23 component.
Okay. There should be a motion for this?
No, we're going to get to that at the yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So, so 7 meet the criteria for success, and that leaves 17 districts that we are going to be going back to with feedback and specific requested revisions. And for those 17 LEAs, we are going to give them a little more time than typically when we in this process. It's typically, like a 2-week turnaround time to respond and provide revisions. But in the case of resource allocation, the topics that need further work are not the kind of things that can be done, quickly. And that includes some of the primary requests for revision relate to providing multi-year budget projections, and also budgets by program, blueprint program or formula, or pillar. Many districts did not have one or both of those items, which were specific requirements in the question and for the response, as well as strategies to meet the minimum school funding requirement. So all of those things are not simple to produce. And so we also do have the technical assistance grant program. We're going to talk about that a little more towards the end of the meeting as an update. But as part of the phase 2 grants that you all approved, we are providing LEAs with what are called strategic partners to work with them specifically on strategic budgeting and resource allocation. And we have 18 districts that have requested to participate in that program, many of them in cooperation and working with their county government as part of this work. And so we are going to give districts and their partners and their strategic partners until later in October to provide their revisions. So we will be sending out that feedback very, very soon this week. And for the 7 that we are recommending approval, you have the 7 districts, you have the feedback form for each district, and as does the public. So very similar to the process for the overall LEA plans. For resource allocation, we used a similar approach, and there's a document for each of the 7 districts that are recommended for approval today, with very specific feedback. And I will say, even, sort of following on what Emma said, the 7 that we are recommending approval for are, they meet the requirements, but there is still more work to do, obviously. And in particular, we're hoping that the technical assistance support will help districts develop more strategies to allocate funds to the schools, so that money is following students to the schools based on the needs of the students, so that all of our students are successful. And so that is a very critical area of need to, provide more support and help our districts think, a little outside the box or more innovatively. Many of them are doing that, but this is hard work, and it hasn't been done before in this way, especially in Maryland. And so we're going to use the technical assistance grant to really provide that additional support, both to the districts that have met the requirements and those that have not. Are there any questions about question 23? Okay. I think we can move on to the career ladder. So last month we provided some initial recommendations on the career ladders that have been submitted. And just as a reminder, we shared this last month, but those initial career ladders were required to include what they've negotiated and agreed upon for levels 1 through 3 of the career ladder, including what the salary schedule will be, as well as the roles and responsibilities of teachers on levels 1 to 3. And then in addition, if an LEA is planning to implement level 4 of the career ladder in this current school year, that they would provide their level 4 of their career ladder and the roles and responsibilities. In addition, districts, the AIB gave the districts a little more time to submit their what's called initial maintenance of certification for national board certification. So under the blueprint law, there's a salary increase that's associated with earning national board certification the first time, or the first time under the law. And then additional salary increases are subject to negotiation to be provided each time that a teacher maintains their certification. And that is a 5-year cycle for maintenance. And so the first maintenance of certification amount that was agreed upon was required to be submitted by September 1st. And that is really, it's a budgeting issue. in terms of submitting, estimating how much the state will need to provide, because the state and the locals share in that increased salary. That's why that is needed now, even though it will not be provided, just to be clear. The maintenance of certification salary increase will be provided beginning fiscal 26, not for the current school year. Okay, so if you can go to the next slide. So we tried to simplify this a little bit. MSD and AIB have been reviewing these career ladders. Primarily Libby Diamond from our staff has been working on this. And so I am going to sort of summarize, and then if you have any questions about the details, please ask. So as of last month's meeting, 20 career ladder plans had been submitted, so we were missing 4. Since then, we've received 1 more, which was Prince George's County. So we have 21 of the 24 districts have submitted their career ladder. That leaves 3 that have not. Anne Arundel County is one of them, and Dr. Pugh described that situation earlier in the meeting. Also, Baltimore City has not yet submitted, and Somerset County has not submitted. We also have received now 18 of the first maintenance of certifications. And so three of the missing are part of the 3 that haven't submitted at all. And then there are 3 additional LEAs that are still waiting to submit. And at least one of them has indicated they needed a little more time. In terms of review of the career ladders and whether they meet the requirements, AIB staff has been reviewing the career ladders, and last month we recommended 7 that met the requirements, although 2 of them were still missing that maintenance of certification, so they weren't ready for approval. And today we have 5 more that we're recommending for approval. And you can see there are still, of those 3, we still need to receive their maintenance certification before their full career ladder component could be approved. And so that leaves us with 9 career ladders that we are still reviewing. If my math is right, I believe 8 of those we requested revisions. And districts have been resubmitting. We've been getting a steady flow of resubmissions just early this week that we will be reviewing, and if either bringing forward at the next meeting for your approval or going back to the districts again. And then Prince George's County that we have received since the last meeting, we will be reviewing that. So 7 additional that we're recommending for approval today. And just like with the question 23, there are individual documents for each of the 5 LEAs that are in the folder posted on the website. That includes feedback, and just like Emma and I have said about the other components, while the career ladders, 12 of them do meet the requirements for approval, we do provide some feedback for all of them. And one of the main pieces of feedback that we've provided for submission of next year's plan. So level 4 of the career ladder did not need to be submitted this year. A couple of districts are planning to pilot level 4, and so we do have a couple examples of level 4, but for the most part, level 4 has not been completed for most districts. And so part of the feedback when they submit their level 4 is to include really think about how teachers who are on level 3 of the career ladder will be able to meet the statute has some specific requirements in order to move up to level 4 of the career ladder. And so we're asking that districts sort of describe how teachers who have been on level 3 will be able to gain the additional skills and expertise that are needed to move to level 4 on the career ladder. And that is something that I think we're definitely going to be having more discussion with the districts about that as we finish reviewing these career ladders and sort of lean in on technical assistance for what they need to submit by July 1 of next year. And also we have our technical assistance grant with a focus on career ladder that we want to definitely spend time talking with districts about, you know, what that means, because I think it requires more explanation and clarity. I see a couple of hands. Member Robinson.
Yes. You kind of started answering my question. It was about level 4. And I was curious about the number of LEAs who submitted a level 4, and then also the number of LEAs who may have submitted a level 4 pilot. If you have that number. Yep.
Libby, would you be able to provide that information?
Yes, I'm not going to provide exact numbers at this time, but it's a handful of folks that are like piloting and doing work groups around it, and that are, you know, trying on different responsibilities for the level 4 teacher in order to really solidify plans for the following year.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah,
we can get back to you with those specific numbers too.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
I have 2 questions, Rachel. If you become board certified, you are eligible, or you receive a $10,000 supplement to your salary, and that continues for as long as you're board certified. Correct?
Correct.
If when you get recertified, do you automatically get another? Based on something you said, I got the impression that if you are recertified, does that 10,000 continue?
The 10,000 is permanent as long as you maintain your certification.
Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. The other thing is, when you go from level 2 to level 3, presumably there is a salary increase.
Level 2 to level 3?
Yeah.
But level 3 is earning national board certification. So that's
okay. Well, if you go, then let me go. If you go from level 3 to level 4, there would presumably be a salary increase.
Yes.
Is that set as the same way that the national board is set and it's statewide, or is that negotiated individually by LEAs?
The minimum is set in the statute, similar to 10,000. And so for lead teachers, which is the first tier of level 4, it's a $5,000 increase.
Okay. And I see. And it could be, if the LEA wanted, they could do more.
Correct.
That would be negotiated with the union.
Correct. And then just to be really clear, the maintenance of certification, there is no minimum. So that is subject to negotiation. There's a maximum that the state will participate in, but there is no required minimum.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Member Lynch?
So I just want to clarify what was just stated. So if a teacher became a nationally board certified teacher and was working in an identified school, they would on top of their salary make an additional 17,000 potentially a year, correct? And then if they moved up to being a lead teacher from that role, they would make an additional $5,000 a year. So they have the potential, in addition to whatever that salary is set, to make an additional, I lost my train of thought, but what is that, 23,000?
22.
22,000. Like I lost my train of thought.
Yes.
An additional $22,000 a year. And I think the reason I wanted to highlight that is because I think, what we're hearing sort of anecdotally is that teachers are saying that, are considering leaving the field to go, receive something that is more competitive in maybe a related field. But that is a pretty impressive salary increase. And you get to stay in the classroom, which is what I think a lot of teachers, at least part of the time, are really looking for.
Yes, and then I will just say, so of the 22,000, 7,000, and you may have said that and it broke up for me, are the $7,000 is in addition to the $10,000 for teachers who are teaching in a school that has been identified as low performing.
Yes.
And then in addition, if a teacher, when they earn to maintain their national board certification, they will, in addition to that 22,000, there would also be whatever is negotiated and agreed upon for the maintenance of certification every 5 years.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Because one of the things I know that we're hearing from local governments is the cost of the blueprint. And a lot of that comes down to salary costs, because we know that the majority of costs are around salary costs. Has that that is all in the formula already? And when does all of this start in terms of the formula?
So funding to support the way that the formula is set up is teachers, it's based on the number of teachers in each district that meet that. So the number who are national board certified, the number who teach in a low performing school, the number, all the things. And then the state funding is provided based on the number of teachers who are in the categories. And then there's a state share of that funding and a local share. And so the state share is provided by the state and the local share is provided by the LEA, via funding they receive from their county government. So the funding has already been flowing for teachers who are national board certified and for teachers who teach in low performing schools. Funding for teachers who have earned their first maintenance certification will begin next year. And funding for teachers on level 4 of a career ladder, if there were any, would begin next year. All right. Dr. Sanderson is here from MSDE, but he has graciously agreed to give us about 5 more minutes. And so I think with that time, excuse me?
Are we if we're not ready for a motion, we should go to him, I guess, in a way.
I think we could very quickly, and then if there are a lot of questions, take a pause. I think we could get through these pretty quickly. Emma, could you go to the next slide? So as we reported last month, all 24 LEAs have submitted the attestation that they provided the 10% teacher salary increase. We did follow up with a couple of districts just to make sure the documents were correct. And all 24 LEAs have met this requirement. Next slide. We've spent a lot of time on literacy plans, and then career counseling MOUs are currently we've received only a few career counseling MOUs at this time. We're actually we had a meeting I think it was last week. But we're gonna be sending out some additional guidance around with MSDE and CT committee around what needs to be included in these revised MOUs. And we're also going to give them a deadline so that we can get these MOUs moving. And so I think
Rachel, I'm sorry. What is the main issue, just quickly, why we don't have the MOUs in?
I will share, and then Rachel Amstutz, if you want to add anything. I think one of the main hiccups is the flow of funds from the LEA to the local workforce development boards, and an agreement on how the monies are going to be transferred on a regular basis, and then also how the monies are actually going to be spent. Rachel, do you want to add anything?
That is the main issue. There's also just some work happening around the carryover funds from last year that they're still working through those plans of figuring out how they want to use those and need to be in full agreement across the 3 MOU partners on those. Broadly, we had about half that did not plan to update an MOU, and we're talking with them that we may actually need some updates, but I think we've got most of them in a good place that we anticipate getting them soon, but you know how it is with money. Money's a sensitive topic that they're working through and just getting to a place where they agree on how to move forward in the coming year with the new allocation and the leftover money.
Okay, I see. A little unfortunate, but I see. Thank you.
And it isn't holding up the work. We do have career counselors in schools I believe in every county that hit the ground running as schools opening these weeks. It's not stopping anything happening for our students.
Okay, good point.
Thank you. So as I said, we've got these, I think 6 components to the LEA implementation plans this year. And in order for the AIB to approve a plan and recommend and approve the release of the blueprint funds that are automatically held each year, every component has to be completed and met the requirements. And so Emma, if you can go to our other document. Ooh, can you make that any bigger? Okay, thank you. This is also available on the website, but you can see there is a column for each of the components. And so the first column is the part 1 and part 2 plans. And I'm gonna add to the, I can't really see and count at the same time. I believe 21 of the LEAs have met that requirement. Is that right, Emma?
Yes, that is correct.
So we've got 21 LEAs that have met the first component. We've got, I'm sorry, I can't see. It's too small. Hold on. There we go. And then we have 12 LEAs that have met the career ladder requirement at this point. That includes the maintenance of certification. We've got all the districts that have met the salary increase attestation and the literacy plan. And then we've got no districts that have met the career counseling MOU yet. So the bottom line is we're making a lot of good progress. The districts are making good progress. Everyone's working very hard, but at this time, we don't have any LEAs that have met the requirements for all of the components. And so, Mr. Chair, that is why we are not ready for any motions on this agenda item, because we need, district needs to have a check mark in every column in order to have a motion for approval and release of funding. We're very close to having many of those, but we're not quite there.
Okay.
Are there any questions about that? Okay.
All right.
Then we can go to the next agenda item. And we have with us Dr. Jeff Sanderson, who is a deputy superintendent over accountability in the State Department of Education. Dr. Sanderson has presented at joint board meetings. So you will recognize him, and he is here to give an update on the latest MCAP results. Dr. Sanderson? Are you there? I know you're there. Here. Great.
So I didn't realize I was controlling that. My apologies. I thought I was. So, thanks for having me today. Thanks, Rachel, for the introduction. We'll share with you all a presentation delivered to our State Board of Education last Tuesday on the updated or most recent MCAP results. It also will be able to give you some idea about previous historical trends, and also some of the things at the agency that we're looking to implement to be able to support LEAs going forward. With that, am I sharing my screen or is Emma? Okay.
Are you able to share your screen?
I should. Yep. Let me.
That doesn't work then. Well,
yep, I can do that. Is that visible for you all?
Yes. It is. Could you maybe put it in full screen mode?
Yep, we will do that right now. How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay. So the only disclosure I'll make is I'm not going to be able to see hands because you all are on the right side. So either Rachel just stop me or you all just shout out if you need for me to stop or restate something as I go through the presentation.
We can do that. I totally understand that.
Okay, very good. So what I'd like to go over with you all is just kind of do a brief recap of the state assessments that we have here in Maryland, and we'll dive into most recent results from English language arts, mathematics, and science, and then talk about our next steps as an agency. What is the department going to be doing to support the LEAs and locals in their efforts for continuous improvement in the 2024-2025 school year. And then the appendix I probably won't touch on, but just so you're aware, it's timeline of additional reporting that's going to be coming out of my office here in the next couple of months, just so that people have awareness around additional information that will be available. No changes here from any of you that are familiar with the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program. We have assessments that are largely a function of federal requirements through ESSA and address the core content areas. We also have assessments that are specific to students that are learning English as a second language to determine language proficiency, and also alternate versions for the very small percentage of our students with disabilities that require more extensive supports and accommodations while they are testing. And then finally, the one we've talked about a little more recently in this past school year as it wound down was the kindergarten readiness assessment as we transitioned from the previous instrument that we used into the new adoption and new instrument rollout. For here, let me see if I need to do one little screen edit. Okay, I'm good now. The message in large part is a little change that we have observed in the assessments. Now, while we've seen changes at grade levels, and I'll share with you the overall impact, but when we looked at English language arts over a 3-year period across all tests, we recognized approximately a 3 percentage point increase from starting place in 2022, which is largely kind of considered the post-pandemic baseline, if you will, and to where we are most recently with the spring 2024 performance. You see, we do have some variance across the grade levels, with 44% being the lowest performing grade level most recently for 5th grade English language arts, up to 55% in grade 10. And then what you'll see in following slides also is the differences that exist across our various student groups, whether it is looking at ethnicity or service programs and or even gender, I might add, particularly in the case of English language arts, where there was a significant difference between females and males. This is the exact same information. I just tried to format it a little bit differently to maybe, hopefully, be easier in trying to quickly at a glance determine what is the net effect difference over the period of these three test administrations. And so just to orient you, I'm going to walk you through the English language arts grade 3 row. So you're familiar with the data, not necessarily going to go through each individual data point, but what you'll see in the first column is most recently for the third grade, the proficiency rate was 46.5%. Previously in 2023, it was at 48%, and then 45.8% in 2022. And so the next to last column represents what is the difference in most recent and the immediate prior year. So what is the difference between spring 2024 compared to spring 2023? And you'll see in this instance, the grade 3 reading actually experienced some decline most recently when compared to the previous school year. But when you look over the 3-year period of test administrations, the overall net difference is positive 0.7 of a point. So just under a percentage point increase when you're comparing over the 3-year period. Same information, same layout for the remaining grade levels. And then you'll see the very last row, which I had alluded to, the overall difference over this 3 test administration period is approximately 3 percentage points of improvement, with most recently seeing not much change to speak of. This slide illustrates the performance differences I had just mentioned. When you look at on the left-hand side, it's 2-year comparisons for each of our ethnic groups. And then on the right side, you'll see for various service programs, including the multilingual learners, the economically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities, and then lastly on gender. And so the key message here and what we're observing in the data is large proficiency gaps continue. And for the most part, the movement that is occurring within each individual student group is proportionately related to. So if I was outperforming a previous student group or another student group by a certain amount, currently still outperforming that same student group because the performance across student groups is moving at similar rates. And then the last piece, again here, if you were to look at on gender disparity, which is pronounced in English language arts, you'll see that the female student group on average is outpacing their male counterparts by approximately 10 percentage points, both most recently and in prior year. This one, I believe, is going to be a familiar slide for the group, taking the visual of the state of Maryland, being able to plot by LEA, and then creating density on proficiency rates with the reddest or most red being the highest performing proficiency rates that were observed within our LEAs, down to the gray shading represents the lowest performing proficiency. The far right-hand table also shows from top to bottom each of the rates at the overall. So this would be combining all English language arts tests that were administered and scored in each of our LEAs. And so you can quickly observe that even in this example that you have a pretty wide variance across the LEAs and proficiency rates. For mathematics, the next few slides are going to be similarly formatted. This one looks at 3 years at a glance, starting with third grade and then up through geometry, and then a combined all test to be able to determine what is the rates of change. If you recall on the English language arts slide, the overall all test rate most recently was 48%. It's about half that rate here in mathematics. And that's been one of the biggest trends we've observed, not just as a state, but also nationally, with the differences in the learning rebound that has occurred, and how math is definitely more difficult to be able to recover from learning loss experience during pandemic closures. You'll see here in grade level disparities, mathematics for grade 8 came in with the lowest performance at 7% proficient, and up to 40% in 3rd grade. And so that kind of gives you some sense of the work that we really have left to do in supporting our LEAs and improvements, particularly around in the area of mathematics. Next slide, same information is kind of repackaged differently, maybe generate some different interpretations or meaning for the data. I think if nothing else, what would be encouraging within the area of mathematics, while acknowledging that we have more significant improvements that need to occur, when you look at the overall gains that have been made over the 3-year period, you'll see in almost every instance, with the exception of geometry, that there are positive trending that is occurring within mathematics. But similarly to English language arts, when you combine all grade levels over the period of 3 test administrations, the net improvement is at approximately 3 percentage points. So recognizing again here that this is an area for us of high focus and acceleration. Similarly, within student group disaggregation, we would see the higher performing ethnic groups continuing to perform at levels that we observed previously. It's just their overall percent proficient is lower, because in general mathematics, again, is at a lower proficiency rate. Within our service groups, again, they are struggling among the most of our students and demonstrating success on state assessments. And then here, the gender disparity flips a little bit, but not nearly as much of a difference between the 2 student groups. But in mathematics, we see that male students are slightly outperforming their female counterparts. Same format now, looking at mathematics as an illustration on state of Maryland visual. You'll see concentrations based on percent proficient, same schema, with the most intense red being the highest performing LEAs, but that it no longer is greater than 60% rate that we had as our key in English language arts. But the starting place here on trying to create some quartiles or buckets would be looking at 35% proficient, just because of the lower overall performance in the state in mathematics. And then on the right-hand side, you can once again see differences across our LEAs, and some 31 percentage points that is the distance between our lowest performing and our highest performing school district. For this slide, this one is, I believe, a new slide to you all. I believe it was a new slide to our state board as well. It was one that I worked on, trying to maybe draw a little more attention to the blueprint, particularly around the focus on college career readiness. And so my interest in creating this slide was we do hear feedback around middle school mathematics, and also about the fact that not all students are taking their grade level equivalent because they are taking high school bearing credit courses in mathematics and on a more accelerated track. And so what I wanted to illustrate here is what is the performance for students, regardless of grade level, that are taking Algebra 1 for the first time. And so the number here, you'll see the overall rate is slightly adjusted. You may not recall, but on the earlier slide for Algebra 1, the percent proficient rate was 20%. That's a little higher here because we have removed those retesters that were not successful previously. And so it does improve the overall proficiency rate just slightly, up to 21.1%. But what is more pronounced here, and visually cues off very quickly as you move from left to right. And so the sixth grade students that represent a small share, albeit of students taking Algebra 1, in large part are almost universally successful on the exam with approximately 94% passing rate or proficiency rate on Algebra 1. You'll see that it does trend downward, and once in seventh grade and eighth grade, but collectively, middle school students taking the Algebra 1 and of course exam by far much more successful on this instrument than their high school counterparts. The other piece that's not represented here in the slide, but I'll just kind of give you as kind of some context, part of, again, interest in my research and my experience in working in this area. I wanted to see not just how middle school students were performing on the Algebra 1 test, but what share of our middle school students actually are taking this Algebra 1 test. So I have given you the counts to the far right, but provide a little more context. You likely don't have memorized the grade level enrollment statewide. But what I can tell you for seventh graders as an example, those 7,232 test takers represent approximately 11% of all seventh graders in the state of Maryland in the 23-24 school year. And then continuing, when you look at eighth grade, the 16,000 approximately that participated in the Algebra 1 test, they represent about 25% of the eighth graders most recently. And so collectively, if you were to look at seventh and eighth graders and someone were to ask what percentage of our seventh and eighth graders most recently take the Algebra 1 test instead of their grade level equivalent math test, it would be approximately 18%. So just a little under a fifth or 1 in 5 students in seventh or eighth grade taking Algebra 1 in lieu of their grade level MCAP math test. For science, we continued a downward trend. It was more pronounced in eighth grade when comparing 2022 to 2023. This year, it seemed to take on that same type of trajectory when comparing at grade 5 for 2023 to 2024. And certainly, as the percent proficient rates indicate, the decline in fifth grade science was more sizable for sure than what we observed in eighth grade science when comparing year to year for those two tested grade levels.
Hey, Jeff.
Yep.
What's a little counterintuitive here is there was some slight increase in English language arts over the 3 years and some slight increase in math on it, in general, if that's the takeaway. Here, there's a decline, and it's sort of counterintuitive that if students are doing better in math and reading, why are they doing less well in science?
Yep, I agree with you, sir. And if I recall from the June board meeting when I fielded some of your questions, you're a math guy by nature.
Yes, I am.
And typically, math mostly tracks with science performance because of the STEM nature of the two content areas. And so this has been something we've been trying to unpack. And to be honest, particularly when I saw preliminary fifth grade science results, we ran a series of validation tests just to try to rule out anything that potentially compromised these results. And we've gotten assurances not only from the internal team, but also working with our external contractors that the results are results that we can interpret and respond to. But as far as why we observed nearly an 11 percentage point decrease in fifth grade from prior year to current year, that is still one of those questions we're trying to come up with good answers and some hypotheses too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So on this one, this slide and the next one will represent grade 8. And so what you'll see here is fifth grade performance broken out by student groups again. Similarly, if you'll recall, the most recent proficient rate for grade 5 science came in at 24%. And so this is the representation of that performance by ethnicity, continuing to see the strongest ethnic groups based on performance are within the Asian student group and the white student group. On the service program side, you'll see great difficulty with our students within these particular service programs being able to experience success on the test. And then within gender, very little gender differences in 5th grade science. For 8th grade, message is fairly similar. Again, the uptick in overall percentage difference between 5th grade and 8th grade most recently was approximately 1 percentage point, with 8th grade overall passing rates coming in at 25%. And so you'll see the differences again across the ethnic student groups, and then also on service programs with multilingual students continuing to be the student group that is most challenged by these particular tests.
Hey, Jeff.
Yep.
Science is a very broad term. So what science is being tested in the 5th grade, and what science is being tested in the 8th grade?
So I will follow up with a better answer than me trying to just make that up. I can tell you, as one point of reference, we do have test blueprints that I can share with the board that outlines what is to be taught on not only 5th grade science, but also on 8th grade science. And that's how, based on those test blueprints, that the tests themselves were designed when they underwent construction. But as far as content related, I'm going to be your data guy. And so let me do a follow-up with that.
It's not a big deal, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What topic that's being tested, subject that's being tested?
Sure. Follow up on that. And then part of what we introduced, reintroduced, you all have been along this journey with us for quite some time. You'll recall that in June of 2023, our state board adopted a strategic plan to help inform the agency work in supporting LEAs. And then shortly thereafter, the AIB adopted, if I get it correct, not a refresh, but you revisited an existing implementation plan. And so you made some updates to that plan in August of 2023. And then most recently in February of this current year, the state plan was introduced by the Moore-Miller State Plan. And so all three of these education focused artifacts had different ways of measuring progress, but they had some natural intersections. And so that became the work after a February presentation to the joint board to, for my team, along with working with Rachel and her team, to kind of determine where we can come up with some alignments across these three plans and adopt some targets that would give us information on progress that would inform each of the plans. And so we brought that information to you all in June. One of the challenges we had at that time, honestly, was the time differences in how data is reported, because we were dealing with student outcome measures, which at that point was a little bit of a legacy because it was from the 22-23 school year. We were able to introduce staff outcomes and staff measures such as teacher diversity and teacher retention that was more current because it was a part of our fall 2023 data collection. So it was in the next year cycle. And so at that time, we still tried to adopt a going forward approach on accelerating improvements in content areas as well as in other areas. And now that we've received more timely and current information, part of the interest that our state superintendent had in conversations, particularly with the LEA superintendents, was using most recent data as our baseline. And now on a going forward basis, having same expectations for improvements. And we also felt like through these conversations that we potentially could streamline it, make it a little simpler, instead of being, we were very specific in targets that were unique to each subject and or grade level. And broadly, for proposal to our state board was we adopted an approach of a 5 percentage point increase, which from one year to the next, which is still in the land that I live in and the world that I work in and my work is significant. And so what we're sharing with you all here is the results from 2024 that I just went through. So as an example, our proficiency rate for third grade reading in 2024 was 46%. What we're proposing was that we increased over the next 2 years 5 percentage points each year for a net improvement of 10 percentage points. And you can kind of contrast that when you start looking at, as an example, the second row with the percent of 3 through 8 students, that combined measure in which I referenced about the net over the previous 3 years had been an improvement of 3 percentage points approximately. And what we're trying to accomplish over the next 10 years is accelerating that with a 10 percentage point increase with 5 percentage points for year one and then 5 percentage points for year two. Likewise, same approach with science with mathematics, with the fifth grade as our measure that we had adopted for checking in on system progress, trying to promote improvements from 29% up to 39% over the 2-year period. And then on that last measure, that combined across all grades that are tested in 3 through 8, being able to again recognize plus 5 percentage points this upcoming year, and then another plus 5 percentage point in the next year that follows. I have 3 more slides, and then I'm opening it up for questions to you all. The next 3, I'm probably going to be less informative, but I can step through. My colleague, Dr. Collins, was at the board table with me sharing the work of teaching and learning and how her team was going to be supporting the LEAs on a going forward basis. Some of the big initiatives that you are, I'm certain, aware of. We had a recently formed partnership with SUNY and the AIM Institute, and part of that is promoting the science of reading and being able to build that up for our workforce and being able to provide additional micro-credentials as they become experts in the area of science and reading. And some of the other initiatives that you'll see that are being stood up this year and or continuation of some of the pre-existing work will be the Standards and Framework Validation Committee, which is going to be taking a deep dive in English language arts to examine alignment across the standards. You'll see we have English learning labs, also the monthly collaboratives in working with ELA supervisors, and then working on that next to last piece that I've been somewhat involved with. I know Rachel's been also very involved just on the expert review team in trying to determine the methodology for identifying selected schools that are going to be receiving the expert review team visits to be able to support them in school improvement this upcoming school year. And so that work has been completed on the identification side, the schools that have been selected. We've also notified those respective schools, and then now it's calendarizing those visits, how they're going to occur, utilizing the rubrics that the team at MSDE has developed in order to be able to provide constructive feedback as they partner with these LEAs and with their respective schools. Mathematics, some similar approaches that we're going to big focus here to see with high quality instructional material.
Jeff,
Yep.
I apologize. I was on mute. On the literacy, we just heard from the leaders of MILE, and when we asked, what is, what's the, if you could pick one thing that needs to happen, and I guess that's a hard question to answer, but something that came through was more training, more teacher training. And when I look through this literacy supports for LEAs, maybe it's in there, but I don't see training.
Yeah, and what I can do as a follow-up is to share with you the implementation plan particularly as it surrounds the new partnership with SUNY and the AIM Institute, but it is baked in every aspect on going forward about the training and being able to provide opportunity to teachers.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. For mathematics, similarly, we talked about the high quality instructional materials and having the teams reviewing that. There'll be statewide initiatives that are be introduced as well as ongoing. We'll have continuation of the collaboration with LEA supervisors that oversee mathematics. And then lastly, also looking again for those comprehensive math plans and leveraging the expert review teams that are going to be making those school visits this upcoming school year. And then the last slide around MSDE strategies for supporting schools in the area of science, and recognizing that also we have some questions we still need to continue to answer, but they will be bringing together the science supervisors working in partnership with them. Again, you'll see it's statewide professional learning network that is going to be further developed, providing science learning walkthroughs that provide that immediate feedback to schools, similar to the instructional rounds methodology that has been a fairly well-received tool within the education circles. And then again, making sure that the materials that our teachers have that are working hand in hand with our students, that it is of high quality and it is the best that we can provide them to be able to support the learning of our students. I'll stop here, see if there's any additional questions. The remaining slides I have are simply on the timeline for the rollout, and what I'd shared with the board last Tuesday was we had provided information on the agency website on proficiency rates at the summary level for each school, each LEA, and state level. We'll continue to build that out with the Maryland Report Card website and the dynamic features that are available within it to allow for drill down functionality and filtering. So for those that have particular interest in examining a student group or a trend or things of that nature, they'll have data available to them to be able to filter kind of in real time rather than having to work through like a large data file that I tend to live in and work more closely with.
Thank you, Jeff. We do have several members with questions. I think member Lynch was first.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I have a couple questions. The first one is around the Algebra 1 assessment. And have you been able to pull out at all how students do on the first time they're taking the test versus repeat test takers? So I think that's my first question.
Yep. Yes, we have. And so part of the challenge with science, if you recall, is the overall proficiency rate. My estimates is obviously not where we want to be. And so when your starting place for any rate is at 20%. And then when I try to create that cohort analysis that looked at those that are taking it for the first time, even in that instance, you recall it was at 21%, 21.1% proficient. And so our margins are skewed as a starting place. We have done also an examination of, as an example, students that were in prior year a non-passer or scored in, say, the level 1 range or the level 2 range. And then in current year, what is their performance based on that 1 year change? I can speak broadly. We also do have the data that has been served up, but in the instance of mathematics in particular, when compared to English language arts, there's very little movement that's being observed. And so if I'm not successful in mathematics in prior year, there's a greater likelihood I'm not going to be successful again in the following year. And so that's going to be part of the work of the team and trying to better understand. I do have a summary table that I can share with you all around that. I'm trying to understand on the pathways. My observation, it really does have to work back, which we've talked a lot about in the context of CCR and in trying to promote that post-secondary readiness, that this is not a phenomenon that occurs in high school. And so it's a matter of, when we're looking at preparation for our students, at what point in time is it, and when do we start working with them more closely on promoting in the area of STEM and success in that particular subject. But we have unpacked Algebra 1 to a degree. We still have more work to do. I think part of it's understanding the pathways for our students, and if they are not taking mathematics in middle school, as you observed in the data profile for high school students that are participating in mathematics, which in Algebra 1 isn't necessarily off track. It would just be the slowest track for students taking mathematics, and if they're taking Algebra 1 in high school, but their level of success in high school is very low. And so we need to come up with better ways of being able to promote success.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree. I think it's why really having effective first instruction is so important, because we know, and having students have that exposure and have that opportunity earlier is always better. And I think we see that play out in the numbers of science, because we see these themes that repeat in 5th grade and in 8th grade. And having been a former elementary school principal, I can tell you that that was often a complaint, was that the students would get to middle school and they didn't actually have the foundational knowledge that was supposed to be taught in elementary school. And yet we had students who were missing, the science and social studies, some of those other things are the first to go when you're trying to get in that extra reading assessment, that extra reading instruction, that extra math instruction. And so my other question is just whether or not, I think it would be very difficult, but whether or not LEAs or maybe MSD as a whole has really done an analysis to look at what is the time spent on science instruction, not just the curriculum, but there is a curriculum and then there's what is taught in the classroom. And so what is the actual taught curriculum? How much time are students having with that curriculum on a daily basis, not a weekly basis? Because some of those standards end up being weekly roundouts. And so sometimes students can go a full week or maybe even several weeks without actually accessing science standards.
Good question. Now, I know we've had conversations around instructional time in general, not necessarily specific on time on particular content areas. Some of that we might be able to inform as part of our data collections, because we do report for teachers of record on specific subjects, so we can kind of put together a school day. The actual time of that school day, I would have to investigate. I mean, I'm a little bit new on the scene. I'm learning, though, around the 180 days and the 6-hour rule, 6.5 hours for high school and so forth. So trying to understand how much of that is instructional time and the definition thereof.
I think Vice Chair Kerwin is next.
No, I think Member Robinson was next.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. I think you were, but I'll go ahead.
Okay.
2 comments and a question. One, Vice Chair Curran, you had asked a question earlier, and I just wanted to kind of, I was going to tell you offline, but I figured people might be watching, have the same wondering. You were asking about the type of science that is taught. So for 5th and 8th grade, it's a mix. It's not like chemistry or whatever. It's a mix of earth, space science, life science, and physical science. It's evenly split, both for 5th and for 8th grade. And it's cumulative within the grade band. So for the 5th grade, it's grades 3, 4, and 5. It's like the standards are together. And then for 8th grade, it's like grades 6, 7, and 8. The standards are together.
Thank you.
But it's a mixture of different types of science.
Gotcha. That's what I figured. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then the other second comment was in relation to math over time. And I guess we kind of started talking about it a moment ago, but the idea that gaps compound in math. So I've had I guess the pleasure of teaching all 4 core content areas in middle school. And one of the things about math that was different from when I was teaching, RELA, for instance, you know, if you don't master something in sixth grade, you are at a severe disadvantage when you get to seventh grade because the skills are going to build on each other. And so I think that as a state, there needs to be better planning for what happens when students aren't mastering it, because clearly the data is showing that they're not. So if we're at under 50% proficiency, that means like most of our students are not mastering at any particular grade level. So then they get to the next grade and you're teaching grade level content, but they haven't mastered the previous grade level, and it's not working. And I don't think that we've collectively come up with a way to address that. It feels like we're acknowledging it, but we don't move in any direction to address it. So that's a really important topic for me as a math teacher, primarily a math teacher. But then my question was, and maybe this is a Dr. Collins question, but on the slide toward the end about science supports, and the idea of launching science learning walks, was that intended to be for teachers to participate, or is the intention more for, I guess, administrators to kind of walk through? I think one of the challenges that we have is, learning walks for people to learn from them. So sometimes they just need to see it themselves. And I think a lot of times when I hear learning walks, and this could be very district specific, but we don't always include the practitioners in that. And I think that that's a benefit that we ignore. We don't leverage enough, getting teachers the opportunity to actually see different practices instead of being told about different practices. So that's just a wondering for me around science learning walks. Like, what does that actually look like?
Yep. I'm writing it down for Dr. Collins.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you probably said, but I'm just curious to compare where we are now with pre-COVID. And I think the literacy was at 48% roughly.
Yes, that is correct.
Right. What was it? What was the score pre-COVID?
The challenge that we have there and the caution, I'll provide you that information, but I'm hesitant only because it was different tests.
So it's hard to make a comparison. I see.
And that's really why, even though there was a test that was administered in the 2020-2021 school year, it actually occurred in the following fall, and it was an abbreviated instrument, and the scoring for it was compressed. And so right now, the current scoring that we have for students is absent. I'm going to get into the descriptors, but basically 1 is the lowest, 4 is the highest. A 1 and a 2 is considered not passing. A 3, which is the proficient standard, is considered passing, and then 4 would be what we would kind of informally refer to as advanced. When we got into the 2020-2021 school year, and they had an abbreviated test that was administered, you lost one of those performance levels. And so it was only a 1, 2, and 3. And then if you go back, because the 1920 school year, we had an assessment pause because of the pandemic and because of school closures. When you go back to the prior year, it was actually a 5 cut score rating. So you could score anywhere from a 1 to a 5. So even though we've used similar terminology of proficiency, how you get there is defined differently in pre-pandemic. So
it's apples and oranges.
That's correct.
Do we have any other way? Was that the same true with math, I assume?
Yeah. Yes.
So is there any way of knowing where we are in measuring recovery from learning loss? Has there been any way to assess that?
In part, I would think it's more of triangulating the data, but another kind of industry standard that we look to is performance on NAEP. So
yes,
you do have some information.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. So how did our most recent NAEP scores compare to pre-COVID?
So I'm glad you asked. Give me one moment. I can pull up on my desktop. So the most recent NAEP performance that we have available would reflect the 2022 school year. That was the most recent reporting for NAEP. And I do have an illustration, and I can share also with, as a follow-up with to you all. But the summary data, what I did here, just to kind of give you some frame of reference. And for those less familiar with NAEP, it does assess in multiple areas, but it primarily targets fourth grade reading and math and eighth grade reading and math. And there are some high school markers as well. But when we looked at the state performance in 2022, and what I did was a rank order. NAEP provides information at the state level. It also has a few urban systems that it reports out, but primarily at the state level. So you have 50 markers for each of those states, but it also has performance for the Department of Defense, which is a standalone entity that it ranks the District of Columbia and then Puerto Rico. So when you do a rank order, you actually have 53. So that's context. When I looked at 2022, I can tell you the Maryland as a state, its performance in grade 4 math ranked 39th out of the ranking of 53. And then when you looked at grade 8 mathematics in 2022, the state ranked 25th. For reading, a little bit different story. Reading, fourth grade reading was 33rd in its ranking, and then eighth grade actually did break the top 10 barrier. Was in came in ranked 8th. To your question, Dr. Kerwin, if you've looked at 2019, which kind of gives us a little bit of a pre-pandemic picture, the state ranking at that time in fourth grade mathematics was 31st. So we compare that at 31st in 2019 to 39th in 2022.
Yeah. The trouble with that way of measuring, though, is that presumably there's a national learning loss. So
that's correct. That would
that's
be
no way of measuring. That's not a way to measure the learning loss because there's maybe a downturn everywhere, and we fit in. We fit in. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Member Stapleton.
Yep, I just have a very quick question, Jeff. And I just wanted to know if you all have looked at, we focused on this presentation on the means. Was there any difference in the distributions, especially across any of the racial groups, with the students who are in specific programs?
Ask me the question one more time.
So the presentation focused on means, changes in the mean score. Did you happen to notice or analyze whether there were any differences in the distributions across, like the 75th, 25th percentiles shifted or anything?
Yep. And yes and no. And so we have done some of that. We have done some quick frequency distributions to see are there any upticks in a particular scale score relative to student groups and things of that nature. The data, to be honest, it's difficult to do trend analysis from 2023 to 2024 because there's just not a lot that I can get traction on because there wasn't that much change. And so there's nothing that is super pronounced in an uptick or a downward trend or differences across the student groups. It pretty much tracked linearly with whatever we were observing at a grade level, whether it was an improvement or a downturn. We would also observe that in student group performance. Where we did experience, I would say, just as a cursory observation that I recall, fifth grade science in particular, and we noted that the decrease from prior to this year was significant. And if you look at student groups, particularly on the ethnicity, there were some pretty pronounced year-to-year changes. Asian student group, white student group are examples where it was more than significant, the decreases that we observed there. Now, as to what the correlates are for that, that'll be part of us continuing to look at other data points that we could associate with it.
Thanks.
I think that.
Any further questions?
I think that covers all the questions.
Well, thank you. Did Dr.
have-
Collins want to say anything? If she's there?
Dr. Collins was not able to.
Okay. Okay.
We do have a motion for you all, and this is related to Jeff talked about the aligned metrics. Thank you. and the new targets that the state board approved at its last meeting, and that the AI that are here for you all to approve in terms of essentially simplifying the targets so that they're sort of, we don't have different targets for different grade levels and subjects, and then also basing the targets off of the most recent actual base data as the baseline. And so I can read the motion.
Yeah, why don't you read it?
It's literally to approve the targets for English language arts and mathematics student achievement that you're looking at on the screen. That is the motion.
Okay, I've moved that motion. Is there a second to the motion, and we'll have a discussion?
I'll second.
I will second.
Okay, all right. The motion is now open for discussion to approve the motion, at least to the metrics as outlined by the Board of Education, and much of which we've heard thus far today.
I'll just mention that I just want us to be aware of setting a precedent that as the actual data come in, then we then shift the target, and next year actual data comes in, we're probably going to shift the target. So I just want us to be careful and just thinking about what, instead of shifting targets, what are we going to do differently that will help drive change? I think we have to recognize, if things are not moving, we've got to do something differently.
Thank you for that observation. Much of what we talked about before, and I guess this is a good time to say this, that we probably have not had anywhere near the full measure of the components of changes that we've sought to impact improvement. In other words, if we go back and look at the time that we've had our literacy plan out, the discussions, the people out in the field, I think that really did not happen until very, very late. And so the next year and the year after that, I think, would be pretty good indicators, because at that point in time, we would have had a good assessment of the time period for which many of the things we've talked about earlier today would have been actually in place. And so that would be the first full time, a good part of what we think and believe will make changes, as we've indicated before, should take effect, at least it starts to take effect. And so my concern is whether or not we execute those things this year, but they're in place and we have an opportunity now to see. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. All right. I also want to say, though, so we are clear about what we are doing here. This will not be easy. These are pretty ambitious goals that we are setting for the next 2 years. And if you look at prior performance, and you're saying you're going to improve by, what is it, Rachel, 5 and 5?
Yep.
That's a pretty significant step. And so we are placing a very strong spotlight on the measures that we've adopted to make the improvements. And we got a pretty significant target to try to reach. But if we are to make the improvements that we need in this system, then we're going to have to step forward and be quite ambitious and bold about how we get there. And this will be a pretty significant step of doing that. So I want to make sure that everybody clearly understands that now. So we are putting a great deal of emphasis on reaching these goals. All right, any other comments or questions we may have? If not, we're now ready for the question, the motion. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Hearing none, with the caveats we've just discussed, the motion is approved. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank
And,
you.
thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. So, moving on, I know time is getting short, to our next agenda item, and this relates to the recommended appointments to our new Pillar 5 Advisory Committee. And I will turn it over to Member Manco for that item. And Rachel Amstutz.
Sure. So Rachel will help us out with this, but just to give a primer to the board, the nomination subcommittee ended up meeting. We went through and reviewed numerous applications for the Pillar 5 advisory group, and have recommended a slate of 10 potential nominees to serve on this new committee. So I'll throw it over to Rachel Amstutz, who will be able to provide some more definition to this. But wanted to give a big thank you to my fellow committee members for all the the hours that were put in to review everything, and then also just the collaboration in trying to get to this point where we have a slate of potential nominees to forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Menko. So establishing a brand new advisory committee was a little bit different than the last few years of replacing some members who have stepped down. And you heard Dr. Menko mention 10. So in looking at this Pillar 5 group, we recognized that when we put out a list of all of the types of folks that we were looking for, that we were really looking for a lot of experience on this team. And then we've also been seeking some ways to be able to increase stakeholder engagement and feedback that we're hearing from around the state. So in looking at this committee, Executive Director Heiss had us consider, is it possible that maybe we could bring in some more people this time? And so we've met several times in the past few months to review all of the applicants. Last time at our August 1st meeting, we shared with you the number of overall applicants. But for Pillar 5 specifically, we had 54 members apply and 11 students apply for consideration for this. The team really took a deep dive in looking at all of the applicants, all of their submitted related materials, resumes, and experience, and worked to do what they've done each time. It's kind of magic to watch it come together, but they try to find folks who represent all of the focus areas of that pillar. And then try to balance it across the state to make sure that we're hearing from a diverse perspective of people, and that we don't leave an area out, or that we make sure that it's a very thorough set of perspectives and insights. So for this Pillar 5 inaugural year, we are proposing 10 members and 2 students. And the members are, do you want me to read the names again? Is that okay? The members this time that we have recommended are Joni Gutierrez-Palco from Carroll County, Dr. Glenda Prime from Baltimore County, Michael Brown from Baltimore County, Javons Liu from Baltimore City, Candace Salvage from Worcester County, Amy Evan from Anne Arundel County, Heather Claybaugh from Frederick, Crystalyn Thomas Davis from Baltimore City, Jacob Goldberg from Prince George's County, Evelyn Chung from Montgomery County, Jordan Hayes from Calvert County, and William Ramirez from Prince George's County. The last 2 are the student members. And consistent with the other advisory committees, it is recommended that each of the members have a 2-year term, and that each of the student members would have a 1-year term with an opportunity to extend it next year if they remain available. I know that we're a little short on time, so that's kind of the gist of what we're proposing for Pillar 5. So if you're ready, I could read the motion, or if there's any questions, happy to take those.
Okay, Let's hear the motion then.
All right, the motion says to approve the appointment of the new Pillar 5 Advisory Committee members recommended by the Advisory Committee Subcommittee members Manco, Doss, and Robinson. And then
Okay.
all those names.
All right, I'll make the motion. It's so read. A second to the motion.
A second.
Moved and properly second. Okay, then a discussion again, in reference to the motion. I have at least one discussion. I want to make sure that we've covered. I didn't hear again the geographical diversity again. I know I heard some of it. Could you run through that just again, make sure?
Yes, I listed it as by each member, but another piece that I can tell you is that by the way that we, the different regions of the state, we have 4 members from the Baltimore area, 2 members from Central, 1 member from Eastern, 1 member from Northern, 1 from Montgomery, 2 from Prince George's, and 1 from Southern. We had no applicants from Western Maryland and therefore no selections from Western Maryland. And then one other caveat is that we do look across all 5 pillars for representation on the state. Not we can't put somebody in every region on every.
Right, understand. But we had no applicants from Western Maryland, you said, right?
We had none.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions or comment in reference to the members to be appointed? If not, all in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I will just add that the information Rachel was describing is also available in the motion document. So it's all available to everyone. All right, we will move to the last item on our agenda, which I will be very quick about, which is the executive director update. And Emma, would you?
Let me just, in case anybody was asking, we're going to take a short break after this before we go into executive session. So because we had some guests who want to get them through today, we did not break off as usual. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so very quickly, just to cover a couple high-level topics. So staffing update. We introduced you to our 2 new staff last month, our outreach and communications director and our data analyst. We are going to be recruiting for several positions later this month. That includes the government relations position that was added to the budget past session, as well as policy analysts in the area of early childhood education, specifically related to Pillar 2, and also a fiscal analyst that would be working across all of the pillars, sort of alongside our data analyst.
Okay.
So for the positions we're going to be posting for soon, there will be information on the website as well. Next slide. The finance update, I think. So we wanted to share information from the fiscal 24 closeout of the fiscal year 24 budget, which is now complete. You can, we've shared sort of a status of the of our budget for fiscal 24 at closeout, and then also for fiscal 2025 to date. The high level information is that we encumbered funds at the end of 24 to increase the amount of funds that are available for our technical assistance grants in fiscal 25, as well as and that is actually about $2.5 million that we were able to encumber for technical assistance this year, which was sort of planned that we were saving our dollars in 24 to be able to provide these additional grants in 25. And then in addition, we encumbered funds related to the Blueprint interim evaluation. We're going to be releasing an RFP soon to complete that evaluation. But the funds were provided in fiscal 24, and we're going to need to use them over multiple years. And then we also encumbered funds to related to our MOU with the Longitudinal Data System Center and for our website contractor who started just at the end of the fiscal year. And then you can also just see that we have provided the actuals to date for fiscal year 2025, and we'll be providing this information periodically throughout the fiscal year. And then we are in budget development mode for fiscal year 2026, and that relates to both the budgeted amounts as well as the managing for results data targets. Those for the upcoming budget year are subject to executive privilege, so we will be discussing that during our closed session. Can you go to the next slide? We also want to give you an update on the technical assistance grants. We kind of touched on them throughout the presentations today, but just to give sort of a high level update. So for phase 1, which are the strategic facilitators that we provided our first grants to the 22 LEAs as well as the CTE committee. We have granted about half of the LEAs had not utilized their full grant amount. So we have provided no cost extensions for those districts until the end of this calendar year. Already, a number of them have spent down that fiscal 24 grant. And so if you look at phase 2, we also have new grants for strategic facilitators. And so for the districts that had spent down their fiscal 24 funds and are continuing to participate, we have new grants that we're providing for strategic facilitators and the CTE committee to continue the work from the first year, as well as to focus on the big rocks, as we call them, of Blueprint implementation, particularly related to pre-K expansion, career ladder, and the CCR pathways. We've also identified strategy leads, 6 strategy leads that are essentially providing coordination among the policy areas related to resource allocation, pre-K expansion, career ladder, and college and career readiness. I think I mentioned earlier, 18 of our districts have requested to participate in the new resource allocation grants, and they have already been paired with their strategic partner and have met with them and are in the process of developing their final project plans. And then we also have a more limited number of LEAs that were interested in a separate grant in those focus areas of pre-K, career ladder, and college and career readiness. So you can see the numbers are smaller, but we have paired those LEAs with a strategy lead. And then in addition, we are making the communities of practice and office hour sessions and, all things related to this technical assistance available to all of the LEAs, regardless of whether they have a strategic partner or facilitator, so that we can really leverage all the work. And several LEAs had indicated that they didn't necessarily want another consultant to work with, but they wanted their strategic facilitator to participate in some of this more targeted technical assistance. That's a very quick and high level overview. Happy to answer questions. I will say for phase 1, the total grant amount was $2.4 million. For phase 2, the combination of what was budgeted in fiscal 25 and what we were able to encumber from fiscal 24 it's about $3.6 million that we have available to provide through these technical assistance grants.
All right, thank you. Any questions? If not, I would entertain a motion. And could you read the state code section for us? Is Ms. Attorney here, Ms. Dutter, or do you have it waiting for you? For
Rachel,
executive
did you have
session?
another section?
Mr. Chair, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to provide a quick update
Okay.
on outreach and communications. So our new director has been hard at work developing some back to school materials for our districts and our schools. Several of our members have make an appearance either video or by voice in these back to school materials that we're going to be providing out to the superintendents to share with their principals and hopefully be helpful in educating our educators about what to look for as the blueprint is being implemented in this current school years. And then we're going to be working on a similar material to share, focused more on what students and families should be looking for in blueprint implementation this year. And so we're excited to share that out to the districts and also on social media, which we're continuing to grow. And then the website redesign process is underway. We're going to be soliciting public feedback soon, very specifically about the website changes that folks see. We've gotten some feedback already, but we wanted to make sure that we got that feedback at the beginning of this process. And we're hoping to launch a new website in the spring.
Okay, let me ask a question in reference to the question raised by Strong Schools earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
We need to hook the various components of that piece with them as well to get some feedback from them, because I thought they raised some pretty good questions about outreach and information sharing. And so we probably need to connect with them in some fashion if we have not done so already.
We actually did meet with Strong Schools, I want to say 2 weeks ago, but time is a bit of a blur right now. Did share with them that, and I believe that we've shared the draft back to school materials with them, but I might be mistaken about that. But we let them know what we were doing in terms of back to school materials and the website redesign. And we did specifically talk about how we can provide more information for students and families in the public sector. Absolutely. I think that's the end of my report. So I think, Mr. Chair, if you'd like Heidi to read the motion for going into closed session, Ms. Dutter, excuse me.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. For its last agenda item, the board expects to perform an administrative function and discuss the development of its FY26 proposed budget pursuant to sections 3-103 and 3-305B13 of the general provisions article of the annotated code of Maryland. The motion is to close the meeting and then adjourn from the closed session.
Okay, I so move. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, we'll take I'm sorry. We'll take a 10 minutes break after the passage of the motion. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll take 10. What time is it now? 5:03. We'll start at 5:15 just to be sure. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Hey, Rachel,
Yes.
I've got a 5:15 commitment that I can't break, so I'm not going to be able to be on the executive committee.
Okay.
Would you
I'll let the chair know and
express my apologies, but I just can't get out. This is a commitment I have to meet.
I understand. Just let me know if you have any questions or follow up that related to the budget or MFR, because we do have to submit that
Yeah, I will.
on Friday.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.